Shalom, everyone. This is Onia. Sorry for yesterday, missing yesterday's weekly live stream, but I decided to do a new video for you guys. This is just a one-off video. I wanted to go through what books are going to be included in my version of the Bible and kind of explain the process that's going to be done for each of these books, because each book has going to have a different process. So with that said, we're going to be trying to go through all these books today, giving you an idea of how my version is going to be reconstructing these books. So let me share the screen. I have a list of the books that I'll be including in my version of the Bible. So the version of the Bible is going to be called the Reconstructed Bible. And so we have two tabs that we're going to be going through today: the complete scriptures of the Old Testament and the complete scriptures of the New Testament. And that's going to include the normal books that we're familiar with, but also extra books outside of the Bible that many people are not familiar with. And what I have here is a name of what I call it, followed by, in parentheses, the name you will see that's the typical name that scholars may refer to it as, or that just people know that writing as. And then in section B, the column B, I have a statement about how I view the text in terms of reliability, the current copies we have, if we have a copy at all. So we'll be going through that and giving you an idea of how I'll be reconstructing these books. But first off, I just want to say that a lot of people may be thrown off by the idea that there's other books that should be included in the Bible. But there are many passages in the Bible that refer to other books as inspired scripture or prophecy. And so that's kind of the starting point we come from, is that books like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees are actually quoted in the New Testament as authoritative scripture. So by using those that line of process, we then see that what those books say lead us to other books as well. So that's kind of the process of justifying which books to include. But so now I'm going to go through these books. So the first book on the list is the Testament of Adam. And I also have here a Testament of Eve. Now, there is a book called The Life of Adam and Eve. And this is also known as in the Greek version is known as the Apocalypse of Moses. The Latin version has it's the Latin manuscripts of the book, but it's called The Life of Adam and Eve, and it has different content than the Greek version. So overall, my study has led me to conclude that the reason we have two different versions is because there were actually two separate books entirely. So the one book was the Testament of Adam, which has Adam speaking about his life. And we see that in the Latin manuscripts. So Adam is reviewing his own life from his perspective, and that is preserved in the Life of Adam and Eve. The Greek version, however, does not have Adam talking about his life. Instead, it has Eve talking about her life. And both books have Adam and Eve, like they have whoever's talk about what happened in the garden, how the fall happened, and things of that nature. But they have many differences. And so some scholars have thought that they originally were part of the same book, but I believe that they were originally separate books and that they kind of got combined in some ways in some manuscripts. For example, in the Arminian version essentially combines the Latin and Greek version together into a single book. But so in my view, they were separate books entirely. The Testament of Adam also, so in its current form, the Life of Adam and Eve, it's not a testament. It's a narrative where it tells the life of Adam and Eve, but also then quotes Adam's words. I believe the original form of the Testament of Adam gave the account of life of Adam and Eve, but from the first person perspective. And also, we have another document included in some manuscripts called the Testament of Adam, and it has a few prophecies, mainly about the Messiah, and also it has information about the times of prayer. And we see this in another book called the Rolls of Clement. It's actually included in the Ethiopian Bible. And the Rolls of Clement quote a significant portion of the Testament of Adam. Of course, there's a lot of Christianization in that quote that we find in the Book of Clement, the Book of the Rolls. But we can use that as a starting point to try to reconstruct the Testament of Adam. Also, we have a book called the Apocalypse of Adam and Eve, or the Revelation, not Adam and Eve, the Apocalypse of the Magi, or the Revelation of the Magi. And that claims to quote a large amount of the Testament of Adam. And what's amazing about the Apocalypse of the Magi, the quotes from the Testament of Adam are much less Christian sounding. They have a lot more archaic sense to them. So I believe also the portions quoted in the Apocalypse of the Magi are authentic portions of this lost Testament of Adam. So using all these sources we have, the life of Adam and Eve, the manuscripts we have of what's called the Testament of Adam, it's a very short thing, but we have manuscripts of that. We have the quotes in the Book of Clement of the Testament of Adam, and then we have the quotes from the Apocalypse of the Magi of the Testament of Adam. So putting that all together, we have a pretty good idea of what the Testament of Adam said. So that's why I say redacted. So the book we have currently of the Testament of Adam, we have the life of Adam and Eve, and we have some manuscripts of the Testament of Adam, but very short. And so I refer to this as redacted because it's been edited a lot by the scribes from the original form. But what we have is enough so that we can reconstruct the original text, the basic gist of the original text. And so we could have the basic outline, and we can reconstruct a lot of what Adam actually said, more or less, in his words. And we also keep in mind that the Testament of Adam follows along very closely with the whole Testament theme of books, style of books, like the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. So using the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs as kind of like a guideline of what should the Testament of Adam look like. So by using that type of reasoning, we can reconstruct this book, Testament of Adam. Now, the next book we have is Testament of Eve, and that one we don't have as many different sources for. We mainly just have the Apocalypse of Moses. And I actually believe, for the most part, the Apocalypse of Moses preserves almost entirely the Testament of Eve in its full form. So I believe Testament of Adam is more redacted, and it's going to take more work to reconstruct the Testament of Adam properly. Whereas the Testament of Eve, I think, is a lot better preserved, and we can reconstruct that a lot easier. It's going to be fairly close to what we have in the Greek manuscripts of what's called the Apocalypse of Moses. The reason it's called the Apocalypse of Moses is because in the Greek manuscripts, it claims that Moses received the story of Adam and Eve from a revelation from God. But that actually is a later scribal idea that was they tried to explain how this book was preserved. Some people have made a similar thing, saying the book of Job was written by Moses. Again, complete speculation, but people try to say how did Israel come to find this book of Job? And so theories are that Moses wrote it, things like that. But those are speculation. So in this case, it's obvious that the Testament of Eve, or the Apocalypse of Moses as it's called, could not have been originally written by Moses because it's very clearly from the perspective of Eve herself. So it makes sense that it would be an ancient document older than Moses and not the actual words that revealed to Moses. So, and we do have, interestingly enough, the life of Adam and Eve does seem to be quoted or referenced by Paul in the New Testament, and he seems to endorse it as authentic. So that's an interesting thing. But yeah, so now we go to the next thing, and that's called, I call it the Book of Shem. And this is essentially a lost book. I have here extremely redacted, but reconstructible. The reason I have extremely redacted here is because we actually have portions of it quoted in the Book of Clement, the Book of the Rolls that I was mentioning earlier. So what people would refer to this as would be the testaments of the pre-flood patriarchs. But basically, Shem would have gathered all the testaments of the patriarchs into a volume. So I'm going to show you guys where it says that in the Book of the Rolls, so you can see where this is coming from. So so this is, I'm sharing the screen. I need to make it more so you can see. All right, so we have basically in the Book of the Rolls, each of the patriarchs are giving a testament. And so we have the testament of Adam. Like I said, it's quoted, but it's in a corrupt form. But it is, the testament of Adam is portions of it are quoted. Okay, so then we have, we'll look at this later, where it basically endorses the apocalypse of the Magi. So we'll look at that again later. But let's see. So it says that, so Jared is basically giving a testament to his children right here. And then, let's see. So Enoch gives a testament. Let's see. Methuselah finished his testament. So each of the patriarchs are giving their testaments here. And then, let's see. And it says, Noah gave a testament as well. Let me see here. Now, here's the part where we get the source of the idea that there was a Book of Shem, which had the testaments. It says, Shem, the son of Noah, told us in the books of the testaments that Melchizedek was the son of Malach, son of Arphaxad, son of Shem, son of Noah, and his mother was Josedek. Okay, so according to the Book of Clement here, Shem wrote a book, and the book was an account containing the testaments of the forefathers, of the patriarchs. And so, let's see, when Seth dies, let's see where that is. So Seth gathered to him Enosh and his descendants and their descendants, and he gave them commands. And then Seth died. Okay, and then it talks about Enosh. Now this is all in a corrupted form. This book, the Book of Clement, is heavily corrupted. So there's a lot of unreliable things in this book. So keep that in mind. But we can use it to have a general idea of some of what these lost books may have said. Canaan giving instruction to his sons, and then, like I said, Jared. And so it says that Jared gave a testament, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, they all gave testaments. And then, like I said, Shem wrote a book that gathered all the testaments together. So from that, we have this idea that there was a Book of Shem. But the quotes that we have of it from the Book of Clement are heavily redacted, extremely redacted. So the current form of the Book of Shem is very much unreliable, and it would require a lot of reconstruction. So the reconstruction for Testament of Adam is going to be a lot more reliable. The reconstruction of the Book of Shem containing the testaments of the various patriarchs is going to be more basic, and we won't be able to reconstruct it very well, but we can have like a rough idea. And the basic reconstruction that we'll be doing is reconstructing it in a way similar to the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs and matching some of the information we see like from the Book of Jubilees. Now, we have this right here, a statement called a book called the Book of Jubilees revealed to Abraham, and in quotes, in parentheses, it's called Proto-Jubilees. So scholars refer to a document, they call it Proto-Jubilees or Pseudo-Jubilees, that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in a single fragment or a couple fragments. And it appears to be a completely different from Jubilees, but very similar, but appears to be a different book entirely. So let me show you guys from the Book of Jubilees that it basically tells us that there's various books that were written of the patriarchs. So let me just 1 second here. Got to refresh the tab. All right. So let's share the screen now. So this is the Book of Jubilees, and we're just going to highlight a few portions. So, for example, we have Enoch is the first. He was the first to write a testimony, writing the books. He was the first among men born on earth who learned writing and knowledge and wisdom. When we read this entire section, we see that it's very much quoting or summarizing and endorsing the Book of Enoch. Jubilees' treatment of Enoch matches very closely with what we see from the Book of Enoch. So clearly, Jubilees is endorsing the Book of Enoch. He wrote down the condemnation and judgment of the world, again, endorsing the Book of Enoch. Okay, and let's see here. And then it tells us also about other books. So let's see. Noah wrote down all things in a book, as we instructed him concerning every kind of medicine. Okay, he gave all that he had written to Shem, his eldest son. So we have a book of Noah. Then we see Abraham. It says, so Abraham prays to God, and then an angel comes, or God comes, and tells him that he'll be blessed. The Lord God said, open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which has been revealed, for it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men. So it says, and I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in the Hebrew, in the tongue of the creation. So he, Abraham, took the books of his fathers, and these were written in Hebrew, and he transcribed them, and he began from henceforth to study them. And I, the angel speaking, made known to him that which he could not, and he studied them during the 6 rainy months. So according to this, we see that an angel came, taught Abraham the original language, and then Abraham studied the books of the patriarchs, the forefathers, for 6 months, and that the angel explained to him the things about those books. That sounds exactly like what we see in the Book of Jubilees, where an angel is explaining to Moses all the prior books and a summary of those books, teaching him about the history of the patriarchs. The same thing we're seeing was done for Abraham. So this is a basic endorsement of an earlier Book of Jubilees that was revealed to Abraham. And then we have, let's see, this is Abraham talking, and he says, he has found it in the books of his forefathers, in the words of Enoch and the words of Noah, about sacrifices and offerings. Okay, and then let's see. Then we have Jacob. It says, he gave all his books and the books of his fathers to Levi his son, that he might preserve them and renew them for his children unto this day. And it also says Abraham wrote books too. It said that earlier as well. When we compare what Jubilees says to other books, we see very clearly also that Jubilees is endorsing the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. It's endorsing some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the Genesis Apocryphon, because the Book of Jubilees has information elsewhere found only in the Genesis Apocryphon. And the Genesis Apocryphon claims to be some of these books that Jubilees is talking about. And then we have like the Testament of Amram, which parallels very closely the Book of Jubilees. So the Book of Jubilees is an important source for reconstructing some of these lost books. So keep that in mind. Jubilees is a highly significant source for reconstructing the lost books. Okay, so with that said, how will we reconstruct this Book of Jubilees? Oh, let me share with you guys the fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which does not match. It does not match Jubilees, but it's so close to Jubilees that either it's a highly different version of Jubilees, or it's a different book, and it's not Jubilees. And if it's a different book, then I believe it is the Book of Jubilees revealed to Abraham. So let me zoom in and share the screen with you guys here. So this is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, so here is the screen. So this is from 4Q 227 scroll, and it's fragment 2. And it says, Enoch, after we had taught him, and some words are missing, 6 jubilees of years, okay, among the sons of men, and he gave witness against them all, and also against the watchers, and he wrote everything. Okay, so this matches very closely Jubilees, but the portion in Jubilees, it's in a different order, and it has some extra things. So it's not, from what every other manuscript of Jubilees and Dead Sea Scrolls matches fairly closely with our copies of Jubilees from the Ethiopian. But this fragment does not. This is radically different. It's, like I said, different word order, different wording, and sometimes extra stuff. So it appears to be in a different Book of Jubilees entirely. And I believe this is a small fragment from that Jubilees of Abraham. But with that said, so how will we reconstruct that Book of Jubilees for Abraham? First of all, obviously, we will use Jubilees as a primary source because it would have followed very closely with Book of Jubilees. But so Book of Jubilees covers from creation all the way to Moses. And it's a big book, 50 chapters. The Jubilees revealed to Abraham would have been all very, very similar size, like about 50 chapters. But instead of going from creation to Moses, it would have only gone to Abraham's life. So it would have been more detailed. So we would also use things like from Genesis and Genesis Apocryphon to kind of reconstruct what this Book of Jubilees would have been for Abraham. And also the genealogies that we see in Book of Genesis chapter 10, or is it 11, where it gives the table of nations, and it says how all the sons of Noah and then their sons, and it gives each of the descendants for Japheth and Ham. I actually believe that that genealogy was spoken about from the perspective of the angel to Abraham. And so Abraham was actually taught in detail about the genealogy of the forefathers. So we can use what we have from Genesis and Jubilees and kind of put it together and reconstruct very well what this lost book of Jubilees for Abraham was. So I have it here, lost but reconstructible. So then we have Book of Enoch, and it seems in the Dead Sea Scrolls that their copies had 2 different books of Enoch. There was all of Enoch except for the Book of Parables, and then the Book of Parables was a different book entirely. They accepted both as authentic, but we have no fragments from the Book of Parables section in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We only have fragments from the other sections. That seems to imply that their copies of the Book of Enoch did not have parables as part of it. It was a separate book. And we can actually see that seems to be supported by, in our copies of Enoch, let me show you guys where it actually says the parable section is a second book of Enoch. So let me show you guys here. Well, this says the second vision, which he saw. So rather than second book. But so I believe the whole idea of the second vision is actually a endorsement of the idea that it was a separate text being circulated in the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least. And that's why we don't see it in the fragments, because we didn't find that scroll. So then we have what now. Remember, the Book of Clement said that Enoch made a testament. So there's a book called the Second Enoch. It's much less reliable than First Enoch, but it does seem to have the style of a testament. So I would suggest that if Second Enoch is indeed authentic, that it is the Testament of Enoch. And so I have here the extremely redacted but reconstructible. Something to keep in mind, there are two versions of Second Enoch, radically different versions. There's the short version and the long version. I would probably suggest that the short version is more often than not the more accurate version, because the long version has too many inaccuracies and contradictions with other books of scripture. So in terms of which I would give more value to for reconstruction purposes, the short version would be better. To give you guys an example of one of the striking differences, we have in the long version, Second Enoch, it says the year is 365 days, and every 4 years you add an extra day, which is exactly what we have in the Gregorian calendar. You have a 366th day every 4 years. That's stated in long version of Second Enoch. In the short version of Second Enoch, it says in some manuscripts it says 365 days, but in other manuscripts it says 364 days, and it also says, instead of saying you add an extra day every 4 years, it says there are 4 days not part of the year, just like First Enoch says, the 4 intercalary days. So the original text of Second Enoch agreed with First Enoch in saying the Enoch calendar of 364 days and the 4 intercalary days. And then the later scribes butchered that and made it into the Gregorian calendar, where it's 365 and every 4 years you add the extra day. So that's just one of the many examples where the long version distorts the original message. Okay, so now we have the Book of Giants. So we only have fragments of it, and we also have some summaries and quotes of it. So the Gnostics, the Manichaean Gnostics, regarded the Book of Giants as scripture, and they had copies of it, and they quoted it, referenced it in their writings. Unfortunately, we don't have their copies, but we do have references we have writings that they have that quote portions, summarize portions of the story. And some of those quotes actually line up very well with the fragments that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we take the fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we take the fragments or quotations from the Gnostics, kind of put that together and have a general idea. Also, what we see is that Book of Giants follows very closely, but it's a more elaborate version of stories from First Enoch. So there's, in the beginning section called the Book of the Watchers for First Enoch, it gives the story of the giants in a very summarized detail. The Book of Giants would have basically given that Book of the Watchers section, but in much longer form. So we can use First Enoch as well to kind of reconstruct that. And I'll share, let me share with you guys there is a list of Apocrypha books of the Church Fathers, which basically gives a small little detail about the Book of the Giants that we can use for reconstruction purposes. So this is from the Gelasius Decree. Let me zoom in a lot. Okay, so Giants, a book about Og the giant, of whom the heretics assert that after the flood he fought with the dragon, or the Leviathan. So according to First Enoch, it says that when the flood is sent, the Leviathan will be sent out to feed on the bodies of the giants. And so we can use that from First Enoch to have an idea that when the flood happened, the Leviathan was sent out, and there was more than one Leviathan. So the Leviathan is sent out to wipe out the remaining giants, because when the flood came, the giants weren't all killed. They were swimming in the water, feeding off the carcasses. So the Leviathan was sent to kill all the giants that were refusing to die in the flood. One of the giants in particular, Og or Ohia, the giant, now it says Og here, but that's due to rabbinic confusion of the later giant Og and the earlier giant Ohia. They were different, but rabbinic scribes later on, like the Jews, they had their midrash, which conflates Og and Ohia as if they're the same. They were not the same. Two different individuals, two different giants. But so Ohia, he did not want to die. And we can see that from the Book of Giants, the fragments we have. He was very much a stubborn and was trying to survive. So this would have been a story about Og or Ohia, and would have covered the events of his life, and his brother as well is talked about in the Book of Giants. But so Ohia was the last remaining giant who refused to die. He actually fought with the Leviathan, and I believe he killed the Leviathan according to the Gnostic fragments, quotes of the story. He actually killed the Leviathan that was trying to kill him. So he was rebelling against God's judgment. And so then finally, according to the Gnostic fragments, we see that Raphael, the archangel, was sent to kill Ohio because Leviathan couldn't do it. So Raphael was sent to finish the job. So that gives us an idea of that. That'll be used for reconstruction purposes. We also have from the Homilies of Clement. Let me show you guys a quote from the Homilies of Clement, which I believe is a quote from the Lost Book of Giants, or a summary of the Lost Book of Giants. So let me share the quote with you guys, because it's a very powerful quote. It does not match the Book of Enoch. It has some extra stuff not found in our copies of Enoch. So let's see here. Which chapter is it? Homily 8, is it? Yeah. So it is Homily 8. Okay, so let me share the screen. All right, so we have here Homily 8. So this is Peter talking, teaching them. So first he says, in the original, there was not a lot of death, there was not a lot of disease, life was good, but then the angels fell and introduced all kinds of suffering and evil. So because they had at first no experience of evils, being insensible to the gift of good things, were turned to ingratitude by abundance of food and luxuries, so that they even thought that there is no providence, since they had not by previous labor got good things as the reward of righteousness. Not one of them had any suffering or disease. Okay, so they were just full of sin. So then it says, the spirits who inhabit the heaven, the angels who dwell in the lowest region, being grieved at the ingratitude of men to God, asked that they might come into the life of men, that really becoming men, by more intercourse or discussion, they might convict those who had acted ungratefully towards him, and might subject everyone to adequate punishment. When therefore their petition was granted, they metamorphosed themselves into every nature, for being of a more godlike substance, they are able easily to assume any form. So they became precious stones and goodly pearl, and the most beauteous purple and choice gold, and all matter that is held in most esteem. And they fell into the hands of some and into the bosoms of others, and suffered themselves to be stolen by them. They also changed themselves into beasts and reptiles and fishes and birds, and into whatsoever they pleased. These things also the poets among yourselves sing about. Okay, but so none of this is mentioned in Book of Enoch. All we see is that the angels came down, but we don't see any of this other stuff. Interestingly, the Kibra Nagast also corroborates that this account where they asked God that they could come down and teach man righteousness. The Book of Jubilees actually says that they came down to teach man righteousness. That's why they were sent. So, when having assumed these forms, they convicted as covetous those that stole them, and changed themselves into the nature of men, in order that, living holily and showing the possibility of so living, they might subject the ungrateful to punishment. Yet, having become in all respects men, they also partook of human lust. And being brought under its subjection, they fell into cohabitation with women. And being involved with them in sunken defilement, and altogether emptied of their first power, were unable to turn back to the first purity of their proper nature. Okay, so then continuing, it says they showed them the things of the earth. So this fits pretty closely with Book of Enoch. But then it says they started feeding on animals. They were barbarized to brutality. They might not... let's see, one second. Okay, so that they may not, through want of food, turn contrary to nature to the eating of animals, and yet seem to be blameless as having ventured upon this through necessity, God gave them manna. And so the manna would be suited to their various tastes so that they could enjoy whatever they wanted. But they were not pleased with purity of food and longed only after the taste of blood, wherefore they first tasted flesh. So this whole thing about God giving them manna, nowhere in the Book of Enoch. So we would have seen this from the Book of Giants. Then, the flood happens, okay? And then after the flood happens, it says that a law was given to the survivors. Now it says, not the survivors, but so when the demons, when the giants were killed, they became demons essentially. It says right here, the souls of the deceased giants were greater than human souls, inasmuch as they were also excelled their bodies. They, as being a new race, were called also by a new name. And to those who survived in the world, a law was prescribed of God through an angel how they should live. For being bastards in race of the fire of angels and the blood of women, and therefore liable to desire a certain race of their own, they were anticipated by a certain righteous law, for a certain angel was sent to them by God, declaring to them his will and saying, and then it gives a law to the demons, how they are not to harm anyone unless they give themselves over to uncleanness. So it says, lord it over no man, do not trouble anyone unless he subjects himself to you, worships you, sacrifices, pouring libations, partaking of your table, or accomplishing anything else they ought not, such as shedding blood, tasting dead flesh, filling themselves with that which is torn of beasts, or that which is cut, or that which is strangled, or anything else that is unclean. Those who betake themselves to my law, you shall not touch. You shall also do honor to them, and you shall flee from their presence. If any of those who worship me go astray, either committing adultery or practicing magic or living impurely, or doing any of the things which are not well pleasing to me, that they will have to suffer something at your hands, or those of others, according to my order. So none of this is found in the Book of Enoch, and it's not found in any other apocrypha book. But it seems to be quoting from some apocrypha book. So I believe that this is a quote from the Lost Book of Giants. So we will be using all this information to reconstruct the Book of Giants. So that's the basic way we'll be reconstructing the Book of Giants. So next we have the book of the Genesis Apocryphon. So first of all, let's look at Genesis Apocryphon and see what scholars have to say about that. Okay. Let me zoom in for you guys so you can see here. So this is one of the original Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered, found in Cave 1. Okay. And then there should be a section for contents. Let's see. Contents. It's a retelling, they say, of the stories of the patriarchs in an embellished fashion. It can be separated into books. the book of Lamech, the book of Noah, and the book of Abraham. Genesis Apocryphon is largely based on First Enoch, that's what they say, Book of Jubilees, and Genesis, and therefore was most likely written after them. Wrong. Genesis Apocryphon is the source of First Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and Genesis. Okay. And in fact, obviously we have the bias of the scholars who think Genesis is much earlier than these extra books. But the idea that the scholars think that Jubilees is the source of Genesis Apocryphon makes no sense, because Jubilees literally tells you that it got the information from the books of the patriarchs. And the books of the patriarchs clearly matches the Genesis Apocryphon. We see Jubilees endorsing First Enoch as scripture in one of the books of the forefathers. So it's very clear when you compare Genesis Apocryphon with the Book of Jubilees, they line up so closely, it's undeniable that Genesis Apocryphon is the one that is the source of Jubilees, not the other way around like the scholars are saying. But yeah, so it preserves sections from the Book of Lamech, the Book of Noah, and the Book of Abraham. And one of the fascinating things about this is that we have it in the scroll in order. So what that actually tells us is it allows us to have an idea of how big the Book of Noah originally was. We have basically the start of Book of Noah and the end of the Book of Noah in a certain confines. So what that means is the Book of Noah, we have the approximate size of it. So we can use that to reconstruct fairly accurately the Book of Noah. So the Book of Noah is actually far one of the easiest ones to reconstruct due to what we have. So for the Book of Noah, we have the fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're pretty good fragments. We have a lot of it. Now, some columns are more fragmentary than others, but we have a good overall fragments of it. Next, we have, so if this is indeed the true Book of Noah, then that means anything after written about Noah got the information from the Book of Noah. So the Book of Jubilees, where did it get that information? Well, Jubilees says it got it from Book of Noah. So we know Jubilees used the Book of Noah as one of its sources. But where did Genesis get the Book of Noah, the information about Noah? It too got it from the Book of Noah. So we can use Genesis and Jubilees to help us reconstruct the missing sections and the fragments for the Book of Noah. And because we know the size of the Book of Noah, the approximate size of the Book of Noah, due to the fact we have the beginning and end of the Book of Noah preserved in the scroll, how big it was, we can fill in the missing pieces much more accurately. So Book of Noah is going to be one of the easier ones to reconstruct. There are some sections which are going to be more complicated. In particular, the more complicated section is the flood account, because Noah's account of the flood is significantly longer than what we see in Genesis. So there are some things that are going to be a little bit harder to reconstruct. But one of the interesting things about the Book of Noah that we don't have in any other books is that Noah had a prophetic dream when he drank the wine from the vine and slept naked. We assume that that's a bad thing, right? People often say that he was drunk and everything, he was sinning. But according to the Book of Noah, during that time, he was actually blessed by God with a prophetic vision, and he was not condemned for drinking. He was actually blessed by God for what he did. And so he received a prophetic vision of the future, and we have maybe, I have to double check it again, but we kind of have almost a third or a fourth of the vision preserved. So we can kind of have an idea of what the vision said and reconstruct it. So overall, we can reconstruct the entire Book of Noah. So that in my version of the Bible, we will be reconstructing in full the Book of Noah. People might read the Book of Noah from the fragments of Genesis Apocryphon and say, I wish we had this book in full. Well, we're going to have the book in full because I can take what we have and reconstruct it almost perfectly. It's not going to be exact word for word what the original text said, but it's going to be fairly close to the full Book of Noah, what we're missing. Book of Lamech is going to be a little bit more tricky to reconstruct. we have fragments of it in the Genesis Apocryphon. We also have, interestingly, the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, contains the Book of Lamech in a condensed form, in a summarized form. So we can actually use First Enoch, the section about Noah's birth at the very end, is actually taken from the Book of Lamech. It's the shortened version of it. So we can use First Enoch to help us reconstruct Book of Lamech, and we can use other portions of First Enoch to try to reconstruct some of the sections. But overall, there's less confidence of the full text for Book of Lamech. Interestingly, we do have in that decree we were reading from earlier, it actually shows the Book of Lamech as one of the not in that one, actually. It's in a different list of Apocrypha books. Let me just bring up that list for you guys. 1 second here. One second. Yeah, so let's share the screen again. So right here we have this is the catalog of the 60 canonical books. So it gives a list of the books they consider canonical, authentic, and then it gives the books that they call the Apocrypha outside the 60. So these are the following. Outside the 60 are the ones that they consider acceptable, would be Wisdom of Solomon, Wisdom of Sirach, Maccabees books, Esther, Judith, and Tobit. So for them, Esther was not part of the canon, but was acceptable. It was an acceptable rating outside the 60. But then the following are the apocryphal ones. And so you got a bunch of them, Adam, so Book of Adam, Book of Enoch. Then we have Book of Lamech. So it appears that they had a copy of the Book of Lamech at that time. So that's pretty interesting there. Although some scholars say it could have been a different Lamech book than the one from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that is very interesting there because they had Book of Enoch, so very possible to have also had the Book of Lamech. So we will use that to reconstruct Book of Lamech. So now, with that said, then we have the Book of Abraham. So once again, in the Genesis Apocryphon scroll, it preserves the fragments a lot better than the Book of Noah. However, the ending of the book, unfortunately, we do not have. The scroll cuts off and the rest of the scroll is missing. So I believe the rest of the Genesis Apocryphon would have had the rest of the Book of Abraham, and it would have had the Book of Jacob, or as I call it, the Book of Israel. So we can use the Book of Abraham, we can use Genesis and Jubilees to reconstruct the Book of Abraham. The same thing we did with Noah, that we're going to do with Noah, where we take Jubilees and Genesis and fill in the missing portions of the fragments for Book of Noah. We can do the same process for the Book of Abraham. And so essentially, where did Jubilees and Genesis get the stories about Abraham? They got it from the Book of Abraham. And we see in later writings, like the Testaments of the Patriarchs, that it actually references the writings of Abraham, that it was a source for some of the sacrifice laws of the priesthood. So with all that said, that's one of the main ways we're going to reconstruct the Book of Abraham. So I believe, just as we can reconstruct the Book of Noah very closely to the original text, I think we can do the same for the Book of Abraham. And one of the interesting things for the Book of Abraham as well is it also has some more, it has a dream that's not in our copies. It had an extra dream of Genesis. It has a dream where God actually tells Abraham, so you know the whole thing where Abraham deceives Pharaoh and says, oh yeah, Sarah's my sister. The way it's presented in Genesis, a lot of people interpret it as Abraham was not trusting God. He was not being faithful. But in the Book of Abraham, we actually see the exact opposite, where Abraham receives a dream from God, and it's interpreted by them to be, God is telling us that we should do this, and that Sarah we should say that Sarah is my sister so that they don't harm Abraham. So it's an amazing thing that when we have some of these books, we actually have more of the story that's not in our copies, and it corrects some of our misunderstanding of Scripture. Another document, which I believe probably was part of the Book of Abraham, is a document called the Apocalypse of Abraham. It's preserved in Slavonic. The Slavonic Christians preserved Second Enoch. They also preserved a version of the Testaments of the Patriarchs, and they preserved Apocalypse of Abraham and something called the Ladder of Jacob. And so for the Apocalypse of Abraham, I believe that document is an extract from the Book of Abraham. So we can use the Apocalypse of Abraham to reconstruct the missing section of the Book of Abraham as well. Okay, so for Book of Israel or Book of Jacob, we don't have any fragments of it from the Dead Sea Scrolls, unfortunately. But like I said, we do have the Ladder of Jacob. We have a couple quotes or fragments or summaries of stories about Jacob that probably is from the Book of Jacob. But like we said, we have Genesis, we have Jubilees, so we can reconstruct the Book of Jacob pretty well as well. And the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs may possibly be used to help us reconstruct portions of this. But yeah, so that one is going to be a little bit harder to reconstruct since we don't actually have any fragments of it like we do with Abraham and Noah. But still, overall, I believe we can reconstruct this very well. Testament of Job I have it marked down as well preserved. From what I can tell, the Testament of Job doesn't have too many corruptions in it, nothing too crazy about it. So I think in general, the Testament that we have is fairly trustworthy. Then the Book of Job, I call it the Wisdom of Job. And I say, from what I can see, it's actually well preserved in the Masoretic text. The Septuagint, on the other hand, does not preserve it well. The Septuagint may be useful, though, for how to translate certain portions of it. But overall, the Hebrew text of the Masoretic text, I believe, is well preserved. So I think in terms of accuracy of Job, that's going to be a book that we don't have to reconstruct too much. So that's good news for Job. In my view, the Testament of Job is authentic. It was indeed an authentic writing of Job. According to the Testament of Job, his brother wrote about Job's life. So, and then the Testament of Job actually tells us about the Book of Job as we have it. It tells us that Book of Job was written. So, interesting. The Septuagint version, interestingly, endorses the Testament of Job as authentic. It actually mentions it. It says the Syriac Book of Job. And it references it in a way that clearly indicates that it's talking about the Testament of Job. So now we have three documents called the Testament of Abraham, the Testament of Isaac, and the Testament of Jacob. And those testaments are what I would say some of the more less reliable books of Scripture. I find them to be very iffy. But there are portions of it that seem authentic, which suggests to me that they probably are authentic in the original form in some way, but have been radically corrupted by Christian scribes over time. So I have for Testament of Isaac and Testament of Israel or Testament of Jacob, extremely redacted, but partially reconstructable. I say partially because how do you reconstruct a testament that you don't know the full extent of what the testament was? So now, from what I understand, so you see how I have Book of Lamech, Book of Noah, Book of Abraham, Book of Jacob. Why don't I have a Book of Isaac? From what I understand from my studies, Isaac never wrote a book. Book of Jubilees doesn't seem to indicate that Isaac wrote anything down. And there's no real, like when you look at Genesis, you see clear demarcations. You see this is the story of Noah. This is the story of Abraham. Huge section about Abraham. This is the story about Jacob. Huge section about Jacob. This is the story of Joseph. Huge section about Joseph. But you don't see a huge section about Isaac. Isaac seems to be in the middle in Abraham's story and in Jacob's story. But he doesn't seem to have his own section story. So I believe, based on everything I've seen, that there was no Book of Isaac. It did not exist. However, Isaac probably did write something down, and so if he did, it would have been a testament of some kind. According to Jubilees and the Testaments of the Patriarchs, Isaac did receive the laws of the priesthood, and he taught Levi. Isaac taught Levi the priesthood laws in full. So Isaac had some type of instruction that he gave his descendants, and I believe that some form of the Testament of Isaac probably once existed. What's interesting is that the Testament of Isaac actually has priestly laws, and a few of the laws correspond with the Testaments of the Patriarchs and Jubilees. Even though it's highly Christian and highly corrupted form, it seems to get right the fact that Isaac taught the priesthood to his descendants. You don't see that in the Testament of Jacob, you don't see that in the Testament of Abraham, but you see that uniquely in the Testament of Isaac in a way that matches the picture of Isaac in these other documents. So that tells me that the Testament of Isaac in some form preserves a small trace of the original text. So because of that, I think that there was indeed an original Testament of Isaac, an original Testament of Jacob. And Testament of Abraham is better preserved, I would say, because Testament of Isaac and Jacob are significantly short and they're heavily Christian. Testament of Abraham, on the other hand, much less Christian, and it's a longer book preserved. So Testament of Abraham seems to preserve a much better form of the book. And there's, like with Second Enoch, there's two versions. There's a long and short version. So I have to look at which version I prefer, the long or the short of the Testament of Abraham. Also, the Testament of Abraham puts passages in different order compared to which version you're using. If you're using the short or the long version, some passages are completely different order. So it makes it a little bit challenging to reconstruct that text, but so we'll be using those two versions to try to reconstruct the Testament of Abraham. So then we have the book of Joseph and Asenath. I just call it the book of Asenath. From what I can tell, that's actually well preserved. There doesn't seem to be too many corruptions in it. I think it's an authentic book. Now, this is one I overlooked, and I recently came upon this book as an authentic book. So it's the book of Joseph, and let me share the screen with you guys so you can see. There's a book that scholars call the Prayer of Joseph. So let me share the screen. It's a Wikipedia article. So the ancient writers, church fathers like Origen, and church lists of apocryphal books refer to a document called the Prayer of Joseph. And there's a few quotes from it. The longest is preserved by Origen in his commentary on the Gospel of John. And one of the quotes, it says, "I read in the tablets of heaven all things that shall happen to you and to your sons." So Jacob had a vision of what would happen to your sons. But who's your sons? So Jacob is talking to someone, but it's not clear who here. Fragment A, it says, Jacob said, I, Jacob, who speak to you, am also Israel. I am a messenger of God, a ruling spirit. Abraham and Isaac were created before every work of God. And it talks about him wrestling. And it says that he wrestled with Uriel or Sariel. He wrestled with Sariel, the archangel. Now, one of the things about this is that a lot of people interpret the whole thing with Jacob wrestling the angel as he was wrestling God or the Son of God. You know, he was wrestling the Lord, the Messiah, prior, in the time. And that's a popular interpretation. And in many ways, I like that interpretation. But according to the Prayer of Joseph, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be that it was Sariel, an archangel, that wrestled with Jacob, and not God himself or the Son of God. It was one of the archangels. And so I believe this book was scripture. So this is clearly taught in this book. So this is an important doctrine we can learn from this. And so the question is, if it's Jacob talking, why is it called the Prayer of Joseph? Why call it the prayer of Joseph? Shouldn't it be called the prayer of Jacob or something? What's going on? Why is it the prayer of Joseph? Well, what's interesting is it appears to be based on the fact of what we see in Genesis. Let me show you guys in Genesis what's going on here. So you know how Jacob gives a testament to his sons, 12 sons. And that, I believe, also, so for reconstruction purposes of the Testament of Jacob, I believe we can use the Testaments of the Patriarchs as a guide and also use, from Genesis, he has a testament for his children. So let me just show you guys from Genesis, where he talks to each of his 12 sons. So that's chapter 49. So he gathers his sons. Reuben, so he gives him, he talks to Reuben, talks to Simeon and Levi, to Judah, to Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Naphtali, Joseph, okay, and Benjamin. So I believe the original form of the Testament of Jacob had all this, but in a longer form. Okay, so, but now, so we have this section where Jacob called his sons and gave them this testament. But look at chapter 48. What happens in chapter 48? It came to pass after these things, Joseph was told, your father is sick. And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, look, your son Joseph is coming to you. So then Jacob said to Joseph, God appeared to me at Luz. So Jacob is talking to Joseph about his life. And then it says, now your two sons who were born to you are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Your offspring whom you beget after them shall be yours. They will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. But as for me, okay, and then Jacob or Israel, it says he saw Joseph's sons. He said, who are these? Joseph said, these are my sons whom God has given me. And then Jacob says, please bring them to me and I will bless them. So then Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. So this is separate from Jacob's blessing or teaching to his 12 sons. So it appears to be the case that the prayer of Joseph is a longer account of chapter 48 of Genesis, where basically it's like the testament of Jacob, but instead of the testament of Jacob to the 12 sons, it's only the testament of Jacob to Joseph's two sons. And so that's why it's called the prayer of Joseph, because essentially Joseph is asking for Jacob's blessing for his two sons. So the prayer of Joseph is the prayer for Joseph, the prayer belonging to Joseph, Jacob's prayer for Joseph and his two sons, where Jacob blesses his two sons. So that's why it's called the prayer of Joseph. And also, we know from the from lists of extra books how many lines, so how long the book was. So let me show you guys 1 second. In the stichometry of Nicephorus, stichometry means a list of how long certain documents are by lines. So it gives the lines, for example, of the books of the Old and New Testament, the standard books, but it also gives books of Apocrypha. So, for example, we have here the books of Maccabees, altogether 7,300 lines, all three books. The Wisdom of Solomon, 1,100. Book of Sirach, 2,800. Psalms and Odes of Solomon, 2,100 lines. Book of Esther, 350 lines. Judith, 1,700 lines. So we see Tobit, 700 lines. So it's giving us an idea. The Revelation of John, 1,400 lines. Apocalypse of Peter, 300 lines. Epistle of Barnabas, about 1,400 lines. The Gospel of the Hebrews, 2,200 lines. Okay. Book of Enoch, 4,800 lines. So very long. The Testaments of the Patriarchs, 12 Patriarchs, 5,100 lines. What's interesting is the copies we have is significantly shorter than 5,100 lines. So that means that they had the original version, the long version that once existed. Here we have the prayer of Joseph. This says 300 lines. Let me just double check, make sure that's true. because I thought it didn't say that. I thought it said 1,100 lines. Hold on. Let's look at the actual thing here. 1 second here. It's a little blurry. Oh, those are standard books. 1 second here. Okay, here we are. So we have 4,800 for Enoch, 5,100 for the patriarchs, 1,100 for the prayer of Joseph. It's not 300 for some reason. I don't know why they said 300, but it says 1,100. So it was a long book. It was not a short book. So it's 1,100 lines. So using that, we can have an idea of how long that missing book is. So we can reconstruct the basic gist of the book of Joseph, the general size of it, and the content. It was a blessing specifically for the two sons of Joseph. Next, we have the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, and I have it as redacted, but the Testament of Joseph is redacted but reconstructible. Most of these I have it as partially reconstructible, but I have the Testament of Naphtali as reconstructible and the Testament of Levi as reconstructible. The reason for that is we actually have fragments of the Testament of Levi in a much longer form, Aramaic fragments. We also have a Hebrew midrash of the Testament of Naphtali. So that's why we can use that Hebrew midrash to reconstruct very well the Testament of Naphtali, and we can use the Aramaic fragments to reconstruct very well the text of the Testament of Levi. The Testament of Joseph, on the other hand, seems to be reconstructed pretty well from the book of Genesis and Jubilees, because the stories about Joseph would have come from the Testament of Joseph. So again, we can reconstruct that very well. The other individuals, we can use Genesis periodically and Jubilees to reconstruct their life story, but overall, a lot of their life story and what they would have said in their testament, we would have a hard time reconstructing what they actually said. So we can only broadly or roughly reconstruct some of these testaments. We can give a little bit more depth to it using like Genesis and Jubilees, but overall, we can't make things up that they didn't say. We can't just make up stories about them that didn't happen just by assuming, oh yeah, that story probably happened, so let's make it up. So I'm going to try to stick fairly closely to the scriptures as we have them, and only put in information that probably was said by them. If it's just complete speculation, then there's no point in adding in or reconstruction of something that probably isn't even valid. But we can use things like Joseph and Asenath, and any of the other testaments, that what they have to say about some of the stories, to try to reconstruct some of these things. And we can use things like, what do each of these writers talk about? They talk about a particular sin or particular righteousness, and they dwell upon it. So the testament would have been more detail about that type of righteousness or about that type of sin. And it would have been less Christian in, like, our copies of the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs have a lot of things that sound heavily Christian. So those seem to be Christian corruptions by scribes, and the original text would have been less explicitly Christian. So that's one of the things we'll do for reconstruction purposes. The order of the testaments varies in which manuscripts they are. I reconstructed the order based on the order of when they die. Who dies first, essentially. And so, Levi dies last. He's the oldest, and he dies last. So, and it flows very well because Levi is the priest. From what we learned from the Book of Jubilees and Testaments of the Patriarchs, the Levitical priesthood didn't start with Moses. It started with Levi. An angel came down and appointed Levi as the high priest and the origin of the Levitical priesthood. So Levi was the first Levitical high priest. So we have the Testaments of the Patriarchs, and immediately following the Testament of Levi, the last Testament of the Patriarch, goes into the Testaments of the Levitical high priests. So the Testament of Kohath. we actually have fragments of the Testament of Kohath from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Testament of Amram, we have fragments of it. It's called Visions of Amram in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it's amazing that we have these lost books in small form preserved in the fragments. And they're tantalizing information what we have. Unfortunately, the testaments we have here, we have preserved in a much better form. The testaments of the 12 patriarchs. Testament of Kohath and Amram, on the other hand, we don't have as much to go on in terms of trying to reconstruct the original texts of those two books. We can try to place them along the lines of the Testaments of 12 patriarchs roughly, but overall, we're missing some of their life story. So those two books are going to be very hard to reconstruct. Then, if there was a Testament of Kohath, and if there was a Testament of Amram, there almost certainly had to be a Testament of Aaron. You know what I mean? So I believe there was once a Testament of Aaron, and that it is the source of a lot of what we see in the Pentateuch. So I think many stories from the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers were actually derived from the Testament of Aaron. And Aaron would have given his life account and would have given prophecies about his descendants as well. So I think we can partially reconstruct the Testament of Aaron using the Pentateuch, various things about Aaron from the Pentateuch, but and using the style of the Testaments. But overall, there's not too much we can reconstruct more than what we already have in the scriptures. So Testament of Aaron is going to only be partially reconstructible. Then we have Book of Genesis and Yambre, and we have fragments of it, so that helps us to reconstruct that book because we actually have fragments of it. And supporting Genesis and Yambre being authentic is that Paul seems to refer to it as authentic when he mentions them by name in the New Testament. The Old Testament doesn't mention the name of the two magicians that fought against Moses, but Paul says their names. And nowhere else do we get their names except from the book of Genesis and Yambre. Later writers get the names, like the rabbis, they have their names, and some of the other Apocrypha books have their names, but no book has it that's ancient, as old as Genesis and Yambre. So it very much it seems to be the case that Paul got it from that book. And Damascus document mentions them by name as well in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's those two magicians having those names, Genesis and Yambre, is very ancient account. And we have a general overview of what the story was about. We can reconstruct the basic gist, the overall storyline. I say partially reconstructible just because there's no real parallels in Scripture about it. We have mainly the parallels from Book of Exodus about the plagues, but we do not have anything else to parallel Book of Genesis and Yambre. So we have to use the fragments and try to fill in the missing pieces using sensible reasoning about what the missing sections probably said. Because obviously, if you have a fragment here and a fragment here, how do the two connect to each other? So obviously, if one fragment here is telling something that's a completely different setting than this fragment, there had to be some middle piece that connects the two together. So using that line of reasoning, we can fill in the general storyline and connect the fragments together and put a story together of the text. So we can reconstruct that. Okay, we can reconstruct that. All right. Book of Eldad and Medad, we have the size of the book. It's quoted in the Shepherd of Hermas as authentic scripture. We have the general size. We're told that it is 300 lines. 1 second here. Let me just... or is it 400 lines? Let me just double check here. It is 400 lines, okay? So that means it is the approximate size as, let's see here. It's saying it's about the size of like Book of Esther. It's a little bit bigger than Book of Esther, it looks like. Let me see if I can use another book from the actual canon, because they also give a list of the lines from the standard books. So I said it's about 400 lines. So 1 second here. I'm not seeing anything that closely corresponds with that size. So, like I said, it's about the size of Book of Esther. Anyways, let's continue. Oh, and the way we reconstruct that is, so according to in Book of Numbers, it says Moses chose the elders, 70 elders. God told him to choose 70 elders from the elders of Israel to represent Israel. So he chose 70 elders. And then the Spirit of God came upon those 70 elders. 68 of those elders were in the camp prophesying, but went outside the camp. I think 2 stayed in the camp and were prophesying. And so, and it says that it was Eldad and Medad who was prophesying. And according to Book of Numbers, they only had a single prophecy. It was only that particular time. It wasn't later on, but they weren't like lifetime prophets. But it was like basically just prophecies during that time. So from what I can tell, it seems like the Book of Eldad and Medad gives an account of that story in greater detail, where the 70 elders all have visions, all have prophecies, but Eldad and Medad have their own prophecies. And so it would have given the prophecies. And there's some speculation about, what did they prophesy about, things like that. There seems to be reason to believe that they probably prophesied about the quail and the manna, and perhaps some other last days events. So, but that one is going to be only broadly reconstructible, because we don't really know the full extent of what they actually prophesied about. We have a few small pieces that they might have prophesied about, preserved by various writers, that might give us an idea of the basic gist of the book. The best reconstruction of it will simply be following in line with what Numbers says, but trying to fill in the missing prophecies from what we have. We have a few documents that say that they prophesied about the quail, so that's why I mentioned that as one of the things that they may have prophesied about. There are some also that says that they prophesied about Gog from the last days events. So we can take some of that information and try to create some type of narrative for it, but it's going to be just a general outline. We can't really reconstruct that book in full. We have, interestingly, for Book of Balaam, we have something called the Balaam inscription, and it preserves us a dream vision for Balaam. So that's kind of a cool thing right there. But I believe there was a Book of Balaam that recorded all the prophecies of Balaam, and so we would have had an account of what Balaam did with Israel in this Book of Balaam from the Book of Numbers. So we can use the Numbers story to kind of reconstruct that as well. Book of Jubilees, very well preserved. So there's not too much reconstruction for that. There's going to be a little bit of reconstruction to fix some of the errors here and there, but for the most part, Jubilees is well preserved. Similar for Genesis, it is generally well preserved, but it is less well preserved than Jubilees. I believe it's best preserved in the Samaritan Torah text. We have variants from Septuagint, Masoretic, Samaritan. They differ. Book of Jubilees actually corroborates some variants of Genesis from Septuagint, and some variants from Samaritan, and some variants from Masoretic text. So it's all over the place in terms of what does Jubilees corroborate for variants and readings from Genesis. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have something called the reworked Pentateuch. And I believe the reworked Pentateuch, that's what it's called by scholars. I don't think it's the reworked Pentateuch. I think it's the original Pentateuch, the original law of Moses. So I've shown compelling evidence of a scroll in the Dead Sea Scrolls called a Temple Scroll being the original version of Deuteronomy. So we have Book of Deuteronomy, redacted but reconstructible. We can reconstruct it because Temple Scroll preserves basically the original text very well. So we'll use Temple Scroll and some of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments, and we'll use Deuteronomy. Like, the Temple Scroll is fragmentary. It's not fully preserved. So, but we can use Deuteronomy because it lines so much with Temple Scroll in the missing sections. We can use Deuteronomy to fill in those missing sections. So, but then when it comes to the other books of the Torah, Exodus, my version of Exodus is going to end at chapter 17, I believe it is. And that is, let me just pull it up here just to corroborate it. So Exodus, whoops. Let's see. Yeah, it ends at chapter 16. So the question is, why end it at chapter 16? What's the reason for ending at chapter 16? Well, interestingly, Book of Jubilees, let's look at Jubilees, where Jubilees gives a summary of the past events up to Moses throughout Moses' life, and it appears to be the case that Jubilees ends right at the point where the book of Exodus originally ended, in my view. So basically, I'm ending the book of Exodus where Jubilees ends, in the story of Moses' life. So when we look at Jubilees, it talks about how, the Exodus happened, the Passover, right? Chapter 49. And then it says, I made known to thee the days of the Sabbaths in the desert of Sinai, which is between Elim and Sinai. So he's teaching them about the Sabbath. And let's see. But yeah, so it basically ends right in Exodus chapter 16. So right here, let's share it. Now notice, if it ends there, it actually is a very good ending. Watch. So we have Exodus 15. Song of Miriam. Okay, now they came to Elim. They journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. That is exactly what Jubilees just said. Between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, I will rain bread from heaven for you, the manna. Okay. Now watch this. At the very end of the chapter, so that the quail was gathered. Wait, hold on. Yeah. Then it says, after they gathered the manna, Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it. Okay, so then as the Lord commanded, Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony would be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. So that's where it ended originally. So that's a fitting end to the book. Then the book of the first law would have begun. So now it starts with their complaining, and then Moses can't deal with their complaints. So then Jethro comes and tells them, choose leaders for yourself. And then God comes to them on the mountain and speaks the 10 Commandments and speaks the judgments. And Moses reveals to them those judgments. He transmits them because they don't want to hear his voice. Then Moses goes onto the mountain to receive the law for 40 days. And so during that time, Moses on the mountain, he would have received the entire law. We're told in the book of Jubilees, when he was on the mountain for 40 days, the book of Jubilees happened. But Deuteronomy, it's called the book of the second law. So what's the book of the first law? What does that even mean? Book of the first law. Well, according to Jubilees, there was a book of the first law. Let me share the screen again of Jubilees where it actually mentions the first law. Okay, so this says, command the children of Israel to observe this festival in all their generations, for I have written in the book of the first law, in that which I have written for thee, that thou shouldst celebrate it in its season one day in the year. That is the Feast of Weeks. I explained to thee its sacrifices, that the children of Israel should remember and should celebrate it throughout their generations in this month, one day in every year. I have written it in the book of the first law. So there was a book of the first law that was written on the mountain. But what happens, we don't see that in our copies of the law of Moses. What we see is, so it's a weird thing. So he goes onto the mountain, he teaches them about the tabernacle laws on the mountain, and then he stops teaching them the law. Then all of a sudden he comes down and then tosses the tablets. Then instead of receiving the full law again, he starts teaching the law during the wilderness. At periodic times in the wilderness, he's teaching them the law. So the question is, what happened? Why is only part of the law being taught on the mountain and not the other parts? It doesn't make sense. And also, a striking weird thing is, what did he go up on the mountain to write? So let me share the screen again of Exodus, just so you can see what's going on here. So what we have is, let me go to 24. So first of all, chapters 20 to 23, the statutes are given. And then Moses writes it in a book, and they affirm the book. So Moses took the blood. This is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made according to all these words. It says, Moses wrote all the words of the Lord in a book. Okay? And he took the book of the covenant. So the book of the covenant is Exodus chapters 20 to 23. So then when he wrote the book already, so why did he go up to the mountain if he already wrote the book? Because look, in the very next few verses, verse 12, come to me on the mountain, be there. I will give you tablets of stone and the law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. So he goes up to the mountain. He's there for 40 days and 40 nights. What's he doing for 40 days and 40 nights? He certainly was not only writing the 10 commandments. A lot of people think he came down. The 2 tablets had the 10 commandments on them. So you're saying he was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights and only came down with 10 commandments on 2 tablets? Why was he there for that long? According to Jubilees, the book of Jubilees was revealed during those 40 days. So that was being written and taught to him for 40 days. And the clear implication is that these laws of the sanctuary and the Ark of the Covenant and everything were spoken on the mountain during the 40 days. So Moses would have been writing this information down in the first book of the law. Now, what I found when I started comparing the temple scroll with the law, the other parts of the law of the Pentateuch, the order of laws in Deuteronomy versus the temple scroll is different, okay? So the temple scroll has a better order, a more sensible order. And what's interesting is that the order of the laws in the temple scroll matches the general order of the laws in Exodus to Leviticus. It's the same basic order. So that can't be coincidence. So that must mean that the original first book of the law that was given on the mountain followed very closely the temple scroll and basically was giving the same basic laws. The temple scroll was the law of Moses in the context of temple worship, where you will build a temple in one place and you will go to this one place and worship there, only there, and this is how you are to do worship in the temple area. The first book of the law would be when you do not have a temple, when you have the tabernacle that moves around in the wilderness and everywhere you go, this is how you are to do the law in that context. You are to worship, bring sacrifices to me, to the tabernacle as it moves around, and this is how you are to do that. So it gives the same basic law, but in the context of tabernacle worship instead of temple worship, where it's not a fixed place. The fixed place is not fixed, it's moving all around. The tabernacle is moving. So it would have been the same basic law, the same general order of laws, the same format. And so basically, when I reconstruct the book of the first law, it will have the laws from Exodus, the laws of Leviticus, and the laws of Numbers all in a single book as the first book of the law. So it's going to be a radical endeavor that we'll be doing. The first book of the law will be reconstructed using this format. And then when we say, what did he write on the mountain? Well, when we go later on, it says, come back up to the mountain and rewrite it. Watch. The Lord said to Moses, cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. So be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai. So he went up, he cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and then it says, here's what he wrote on it. And then it's completely different than the 10 Commandments. Instead, it reads almost as a summary of what we see in the Temple Scroll, where it says, it's in the Temple Scroll. It starts off saying, "Behold, I make a covenant. I'm going to drive out these people from your nations. Don't make a covenant with them from the land. Don't make a covenant with them." And then it gives like a summary here of like the feasts and to bring sacrifices to him. So this is basically the summary of the first book of the law, the basic order, just like the Temple Scroll has. So based on this, it seems like we're definitely missing something. It's been edited. So I believe the first book of the law was very much just the law, just like we have in Deuteronomy. And then that leaves us to question, well, what then of the book of Numbers and the book of Leviticus? What was the original form of those books then? Well, what's interesting is, remember I mentioned the reworked Pentateuch in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, in the reworked Pentateuch actually has something interesting where, for example, so watch right here. So in the book of Numbers, so we're using the New King James Version right now, okay? But so it gives like the census, right, in the book of Numbers. Most copies of the book of Numbers in the Dead Sea Scrolls and outside the Dead Sea Scrolls, like, all the copies outside and most copies of Numbers in the Dead Sea Scrolls agree with book of Numbers, the order as we have it. But the fragments from the what they call the reworked Pentateuch, after giving the first 4 chapters of Numbers in the manuscript of Numbers in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it goes from chapter 4 and it skips. It skips chapter 5, which is laws. It skips chapter 6. Yeah, it skips chapter 5 and chapter 6. And in the fragment, chapter 4 is immediately followed by chapter 7. No break. Another example in the reworked Pentateuch of Numbers is at the end of the book, we see, okay, so there's inheritance laws in chapter 27. The daughters of Zelophehad came to Moses. They asked him about the inheritance. Okay. Then what follows is Joshua is chosen as the next leader. Then randomly there's commands to make sacrifices out of nowhere. It seems like intrusive because there's no reason why God is telling them this now. So randomly they're being told about the sacrifices here. Chapter 29, same thing. Laws about vows, chapter 30. Then we go back to the narrative, vengeance on the Midianites. Okay. And then the division of the tribes in the land. And then there's the, a review of the journey mentioned. appointed boundaries. And then there's the cities for the Levites. The cities of refuge as well are mentioned. Okay. Then it goes back to the Zelophehad, that story. In the reworked Pentateuch fragment, instead of that, we have in the fragment of Numbers in the reworked Pentateuch, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it has chapter 27, verses 1 to 11, immediately followed by chapter 36, verses 1 to 12. So, amazingly, that is a different version. So the question is, which is the correct version? Is our version of Numbers the correct version, or is the reworked Pentateuch the original? In my view, the reworked Pentateuch is the original version. So in my version of Numbers, it's going to follow along with what the Dead Sea Scrolls says. It's going to have chapter 27, the first 11 verses, followed by chapter 36, the first 11 verses or so, and then it's going to go back to chapter 27. And the same thing with chapter 4, it's going to be immediately followed by chapter 7. The laws from chapter 5 to 6 are not going to be there. It's going to be somewhere else. And also, for the book of Numbers, I'm going to include portions of the book of Leviticus and book of Exodus in it. So my basic belief is that the law was given in full to Moses, and then the law was given in full again by Moses, explaining at various junctures, okay, Israelites, now you are to do this. This is how you do this part of the law. This is how you do this part of the law. So he's explaining it to them. So let me give an example of this process preserved in Exodus. Here's what we see in Exodus. Watch this. Okay, so first of all, let me give the whole thing here. Offerings for the sanctuary, right? Ark of the Covenant, how to build it. Table of showbread, gold lampstand, how to build it. Tabernacle, how to build it. So it's giving all these laws. Altar burnt offering, court of the tabernacle, lampstand, garments of the priesthood, ephod, breastplate, okay? Consecrate Aaron's sons. This is how you shall consecrate them. Daily offerings, okay? Altar of incense, ransom money, the bronze laver, holy anointing oil, the incense. All right. Then it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, see, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship to design. Okay, so then it says, I indeed have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. I have put wisdom in the hearts of all the gifted artisans. They may make all that I have commanded you. Okay, now watch this. We see a repetition later on in chapter 35. Moses spoke to the congregation, saying, bring an offering, get the articles of the tabernacle. Then it says, Moses said to the children of Israel, see, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, filled him with the Spirit of God. He has put in his heart the ability to teach in him, and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. So we had earlier the command from God. Then we had Moses teaching them the command of God. Similarly, we had the command of God to build the tabernacle and all the holy things. And now watch. Now we have the fulfillment of it, where they go and obey the command. So then all the gifted artisans start, and then it gives a detailed description of they made the tabernacle, and it gives in detailed instruction how much, how they built it to the T. It gives the same exact details that was already told us earlier in law. God commanded the extreme detail, build the tabernacle in this way. Then we're seeing the same exact laws told a second time in great detail, where Moses is saying, and then we did this. and we build this, and we build this, and we build this, and we did all the things that we were commanded. So the book of the first law was God giving all the laws in a book, law. Then a later book was written, which records Moses teaching the Israelites and them obeying each part of the law. So now when we go and look in things like in Leviticus, we see that this same style of him teaching the law is happening. But then there's other places in Leviticus where it doesn't seem like he's teaching the law. It seems like God is saying the law. So here we have Moses is teaching the law about offerings to people. Okay. But then watch. Then we have the ordination, and we saw the ordination mentioned earlier in Exodus, where it says, "This is how you are to ordain Aaron and his sons." And then we see Aaron and his sons are consecrated. So now here's the account of them being consecrated. The priestly ministry begins. So then the ministry begins. Then we have the list of unclean things. So God would have given the laws of uncleanness in the law, the book of the law, and then Moses would rehash those and re-explain the laws of uncleanness to the people at a later time. So basically what we're seeing is that what I see is that the scribes took the original book of the first law and the original book of Moses explaining the law and conflated them into two, conflated the two into a single book. So that now the book of Leviticus is essentially a combination of the book of the law and Moses explaining the law. They basically just put it, because they didn't want to have two separate books. So they just put it together and smashed it together. And because of this, we have inconsistencies in Leviticus, where it seems like things are in a different order than they should be in certain places, and where sometimes God is talking, sometimes Moses is talking. So that seems to be what's going on here. So in my reconstructed version of the law, we will be having so like I said, Exodus will end at chapter 16. Oh, by the way, in the reworked Pentateuch version of Exodus, we have a full Song of Miriam, not in our copies. The Song of Miriam in our copies is one line long. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls copy, in the reworked Pentateuch, it's a whole lengthy song that's not in our copies. In Genesis, we have in our copies, Jacob wrestles randomly with an angel, and we don't know why. In the reworked Pentateuch copy of Genesis, it has the story, a fuller story of why the wrestling happened, and fuller dialogue, and a blessing. In our copies, it says Jacob was blessed by the angel, but it doesn't say what the blessing was. In the reworked Pentateuch copy, it gives a full blessing from the angel in detail, word for word, what the blessing was for Jacob. Unfortunately, it's fragmentary, but just the fragment, what we have, gives us enough information to have an idea of what that missing portion of that story was. So my version of the Pentateuch will be heavily based on the reworked Pentateuch structure, the concept. What I call Book of the First Law of Moses will start off with Exodus chapter 17, go all the way to Exodus 30, and then it's going to have a good chunk of Leviticus and Numbers, the law portions, rewritten in the style of the Temple Scroll, in a good order. And then it'll end with Moses coming down from the mountain and destroying the two tablets, and then going back and going back to the mountain and receiving the law again a second time. That'll be the book of the first law. Then we have here the Chronicles. So I call it the Chronicles. Chronicles of the Genesis of Israel. Not the book of Genesis, but the Chronicles of the Genesis of Israel. The Chronicles of the Exodus of Israel. And then I call the book of Numbers, instead of Numbers, I call it the Chronicles of the Law of Moses in the Wilderness. So I start that with chapter 35 of Exodus, where then it gives the story of how Moses and them build the tabernacle and everything in accordance with the law. Then the priestly laws of how that was taught by Moses to the people, and then how Aaron was ordained and his sons were ordained priests. So those stories from Leviticus, and how Moses is teaching each part of the law to the Israelites. Then the rest of Numbers happens, and so throughout the wilderness. So basically, that's how I'm going to reconstruct the law of Moses. So that is going to be one of the biggest projects of all, the most complex, but also the most promising and the most important of my work to reconstruct the law of Moses, the Pentateuch. So I will be using the Dead Sea Scrolls when possible. And one of the interesting things about, for example, for Deuteronomy, is we have things where Moses is talking, but then God's talking out of nowhere, and it's contradictory. It doesn't make sense. And then we have things like Moses is talking to like persons. Okay, so second person plural and second person singular, and it's switching randomly in a way that doesn't make sense. So scribes have definitely tampered with the text of Deuteronomy in a way. They've put things in different order and everything. So my version of Deuteronomy will reconstruct it in a better order. What we know from Deuteronomy is that it starts off with Moses kind of highlighting the past of the, like a history lesson of what happened from the time of the Exodus from Egypt all the way to their time. But it follows a structure of first the Ten Commandments are given, then the account of the golden calf, and then the journey in the wilderness. So I'm following this basic structure in my reconstruction of the book of the first law, where basically, like if you look in Deuteronomy, it starts off saying in chapter 1, talking about where he chose leaders to handle disputes. And that's roughly where I start with the book of the first law. That's chapter 18 of Exodus. We're starting with chapter 17. And chapter 18 starts with Moses having the elders hear small matters for him, so Moses doesn't have to hear everything, to make it easier for Moses. And that's where Deuteronomy starts, chapter 1. Then follows in Exodus the account of the Ten Commandments being given and God speaking to them on the mountain. And we see that in Deuteronomy too. And then what follows after that is God giving an account, Moses giving an account of, in Deuteronomy, of when he's on the mountain receiving the law and then destroys the tablets. We see that comes next as well in Exodus. So that basic order seems to parallel Deuteronomy, generally speaking, because like I said, the order of some parts of Deuteronomy have been altered, but a general order can still be seen in Deuteronomy, where it starts off with the statement about the elders being given the law, then the Ten Commandments, then the being on the mountain and receiving the law. So that same order that Deuteronomy talks about, we see in the book of the first law. So it starts off with Moses needing help, then God speaking to them on the mountain, and them receiving the Ten Commandments, and then Moses going up to the mountain and receiving the law. So that same order is being followed both in Exodus and Deuteronomy. So I think that is intentional, and it's parallelism, where basically the book of the first law followed the same basic structure of the book of the second law, where it starts off with those things, and then it goes into the law and covers the entire law. So that's my basic reconstruction of that's going to take place. It's going to be a long process, but I've done a lot of work on this. I have a rough outline of how the book of the first law is going to be, but it's going to take a lot of work. Anyways, so continuing, there's a scroll called the New Jerusalem Scroll that's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Who wrote that scroll? I believe Moses is the one, because there's a lot of things that seem to connect the language in it with the temple scroll and things like that. So it seems like Moses is the one. And also, it says in other books of scripture that Moses was shown these things. So let me share the screen here. So in Deuteronomy, we see, let me see here. Let's share the screen. So after the law is given and everything, Moses wants to go into the land, but he's not allowed. So let's see what happens. Moses to die. It says, go up this mountain, view the land of Canaan, which I give to the children of Israel as a possession. Die on the mountain which you ascend, and be gathered to your people. Yet, so you shall not go into the land, okay? Yet you shall see the land before, though you shall not go there into the land which I'm giving to the children of Israel. Okay, so then there's a blessing, and then we see in chapter 34. So then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the south and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And Yahweh said to him, this is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have caused you to see with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. So we have an account here, very brief, but it's telling us Moses saw the land. He saw everything. It's very possible that he wrote an account about this. And I believe that he did, and that the New Jerusalem is that account. And supporting this is from 2nd Baruch tells us things about what Moses saw, and some of it matches apocryphal stuff that we know about Moses. So let me show where it says this. All right, so sharing the screen, and we have a statement in 2nd Baruch about the waters. How much are we zooming in? Okay, we have the dark waters. I got to zoom out a little bit. Okay. Whoops. Hold on. One sec, guys. I just got to find it. Here it is. All right, so chapter 59, it says, the bright fourth waters, which thou hast seen. All right, so he saw earlier waters, okay? So let's just briefly look at where it said the waters. Hold on one second here. I thought there was an account earlier, but it doesn't matter, because we're just going to read what the interpretation of it. So the bright fourth waters which thou hast seen are the advent of Moses and Aaron and Miriam and Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, and all of those like them. For at that time the lamp of the eternal law shone on all those who sat in darkness, which announced to them that believe the promise of their reward, and to them that deny the torment of fire which is reserved for them. But also the heavens at that time were shaken from their place, and those who were under the throne of the Mighty One were perturbed when he was talking taking Moses unto himself. For he showed him many admonitions together with the prince. Okay, so he took Moses to himself, and he showed him, who's him? Moses. So God showed Moses many admonitions together with the principles of the law. That sounds like the Book of Jubilees. Principles of the law and the consummation of the times, as also to thee, and likewise the pattern of Zion and its measures. That sounds like the New Jerusalem text, in the pattern of which the sanctuary of the present time was to be made. Sounds like a temple scroll. But then also he showed to him the measures of the fire, also the depths of the abyss, and the weight of the winds, and the number of the drops of rain, and the suppression of anger, and the multitude of long suffering, and the truth of judgment, and the root of wisdom, and the riches of understanding, and the fount of knowledge, and the height of the air, and the greatness of paradise, the consummation of the ages, and the beginning of the day of judgment, and the number of the offerings, and the earths which have not yet come, and the mouth of Gehenna, and the station of vengeance, and the place of faith, and the region of hope, and the likeness of future torment, and the multitude of innumerable angels, and the flaming hosts, and the splendor of the lightnings, the voice of the thunders, the orders of the chiefs of the angels, and the treasuries of light, and the changes of the times, and the investigations of the law. These are the bright fourth waters which thou hast seen. So, according to Second Baruch, Moses saw all these things. What book said all these things that Moses saw? We don't have it. Interestingly, we have some midrash which claim to preserve stories about Moses, and he sees some of these very things in these midrash of Moses. So, in the midrash of Moses, he sees the likeness of future torment. He sees the greatness of paradise. He sees things about anger. He sees he sees he sees the heavens. He sees and it says the orders of the chiefs of the angels. He sees that. He sees all kinds of things that this seems to be talking about here, and it's preserved in midrash. And where did the rabbis get the midrash from? The Jews. Where did they get the midrash from? I believe they had copies of Apocrypha Moses, and they took the stories and preserved it in those midrash. But the very fact it says right here, Moses saw the pattern of Zion and its measures. That sounds an exact description of the New Jerusalem text. And the fact that it says all these other things means that Moses wrote other stuff we don't have in current books, right? So if these things are correct and that Moses indeed wrote about these things in another writing, the best explanation is that if we found a writing that matches this, it was probably by Moses. And so New Jerusalem text matches so strikingly what Second Baruch says Moses saw. So I believe, based on that, and the fact that it actually gives laws and commandments in the New Jerusalem text in a way that sounds like Moses. So it definitely fits the pattern, the style of Temple Scroll and Mosaic authorship. So I believe that the New Jerusalem text, based on this, is indeed by Moses, or a Moses book. And then on top of that, in the midrash I was referring to, in the midrash of Moses, there's various midrash of Moses. In one of the midrashim, he sees a vision of the Messiah, a striking vision of the Messiah. That vision has some parallels with the Temple Scroll, and it has and it has an account where he basically sees, I'm pretty sure it says he sees the land. So let me just look it up again 1 second here. I'm just going to read this, and then you'll see, we'll see what it says. So this is from Legends of the Jews, and the guy who compiled this, Louis Ginsburg, he took various midrash or various rabbinic writings and put them together in a compilation. So it says, on the day of his death, Moses received a special distinction. God permitted him to ascend to the lofty place of heaven, showed him the reward that awaited him in heaven and the future. It says Moses saw God build a temple of jewels and pearls. In the temple, he beheld the Messiah. Moses asked God to speak to the Messiah before he dies. And it says, God told me that Israel was to erect a temple to him upon earth. And now I see him build his own temple, and that too in heaven. This matches almost like very closely to something the Temple Scroll says. Very interesting. And right here, the same thing also matches what the Temple Scroll says very closely. The Messiah replied, thy father Jacob saw the temple that will be erected on earth, and also the temple that God rears with his own hand in heaven. And he clearly understood that it was the temple God constructed with his own hand in heaven as house of jewels, of pearls, and of a light that was to be preserved for all Israel to all eternity, into the end of all generations. Okay. And he saw the heavenly Jerusalem, it says. It says Jacob saw the heavenly Jerusalem. Okay. If thou sayest, continuing the Messiah, that God with his own hands builds himself a temple in heaven, know that then with his hands also he will build the temple upon earth. When Moses heard these words from the mouth of the Messiah, he rejoiced greatly. And lifting up his face to God, he said, O Lord of the world, when will this temple built here in heaven come down to earth below? Let's see. I thought it said that he saw the land, but maybe I'm mistaken here. I thought there was a thing that said that he actually saw the land, but I don't see it here. I'd have to look at it a different time. But anyways, so that also is from the lost books of Moses as well. So all to say, we have some pretty compelling evidence that the New Jerusalem text is written by Moses. So knowing that, we can kind of have a good idea of how to reconstruct that, because we're reconstructing it as a Moses text and partially reconstructible, because there are some prophecies in the New Jerusalem text, but it is because of the nature of the fragments, we can only partially reconstruct it. So, but the best stuff we can reconstruct, the easiest stuff to reconstruct, are the laws or the description of the New Jerusalem, because it matches it goes along a style, like a certain order. So we can use the general order of what he's being seen, what he's being shown, to reconstruct the New Jerusalem text. Then we have two texts, one called the Testament of Moses, and another called the Assumption of Moses. I call it the Apocalypse of Moses, or the Revelation of Moses. And we have references to these books by church fathers, quotes from the Assumption of Moses, and we have lists saying how long these books were. So the Assumption of Moses, we have a fragment of in Latin. I'm not sure why I have it here as fragmentary. It should say lost, but reconstructible. But anyway, the Assumption of Moses, the beginning portion is preserved in a Latin manuscript, and then the rest of it's missing. But we have enough quotes from the church fathers. We can actually reconstruct almost the entirety of this text. We also have how long the book was: 1,400 lines for the Assumption of Moses, 1,100 lines for the Testament of Moses. So Assumption of Moses we can reconstruct very well, almost perfectly, 100%. We can reconstruct the Assumption of Moses based on everything we have: the quotes, the beginning of the book, and how long the book was. Testament of Moses is a little bit more tricky, but the Testament of Moses would have followed along lines very similar to the other testaments, right? So it would have been instructions to his sons about his life, lessons. It would not have really been talking about the laws much at all. It wouldn't have been saying, these are the laws you are to keep. For the most part, it's instruction to his sons, his children. The Assumption of Moses has instruction of Moses to Joshua, but the Testament of Moses would be instruction to his actual children. And we also have a quote from the Ethiopian Book of Clement, which preserves a small portion of this section of Testament of Moses, where, let me see if I can pull it up for you guys. Okay, now I Google translated this a long time ago from Italian, the Book of Clement, the sections that have not been translated into English yet. So the translation is a bit off in terms of how it sounds, but it's translated well enough to see that it is indeed a quote from the Testament of Moses. So let me let me share the screen here. I just got to zoom out. Okay. All right, so sharing the screen here, the Ethiopian Book of Clement. It says, even Moses said, I saw a bush on Mount Sinai. Beneath the bush, a fire burning. I approached to understand its power, that was venerable power, and a voice came out of the fire saying, take off your shoes from your feet, for the land where you are standing is holy. This is precisely the Holy Church when he said, take off your shoes from your feet. So obviously this is Peter talking to Clement, giving a Christianization interpretation. But this part in particular seems to be a quote from the Lost Testament of Moses, because it's saying first-person language. I saw a bush. I approached to understand. So, and then right after, it's quoting from 2nd Esdras, by the way, right here, where it says, Ezra also saw her as a woman sad in distress as she wept for her children. When he saw her, she was not a woman, but a spiritual city, the Holy Zion. Okay, so, but this is an amazing quote, preserved nowhere else, and this is must be from the Testament of Moses. Now, remember I was telling you guys about the Legends of the Jews compilation of Midrash? Well, we have another thing where one second here, where it tells of Moses ascending into heaven at the burning bush. So let me just show you guys. I'll share the screen in just a second. All right. So here's the screen share now. So here we have the vision of the burning bush appeared to Moses alone. The other shepherds with him saw nothing of it. Okay, and then it says, hereupon God commanded Metatron, the angel of the presence. So this is a rabbinic thing. So Metatron is Enoch, right? So I don't believe it was actually Metatron or Enoch. I think it was just the angel of the presence. Like Jubilees talks about the angel of the presence talking to Moses. So the angel of the presence conducted Moses to the heavenly regions. 30,000 angels were commanded. So then it says, in the first heaven, Moses saw streams upon streams of water. He observed that the whole heaven consisted of windows, at each of which angels were stationed. There's the window of prayer, the window of supplication, of weeping and of joy, plenitude and starvation, wealth and poverty, war and peace, conception and birth, showers and soft rains, sin and repentance, life and death, pestilence and healing, sickness and health, and many windows more. Sounds very much like what 2nd Baruch said Moses saw. In the second heaven, Moses saw the angel Nuriel standing 300 parasangs high with his retinue of 50 myriads of angels. Okay, they sang songs of praise. Third heaven, he saw an angel that was very tall. Now, some of this might be corruptions by the scribes, because some of it sounds a little bit off. Like that he had 70,000 heads. That kind of sounds a bit off to me. But fourth heaven, he saw a temple. The fifth heaven, he saw hosts of angels whose nether parts were of snow and their upper parts of fire. The sixth of the heavens were millions and myriads of angels praising God. He saw the watchers there, the holy ones. In the last heaven, he saw the angels' anger and wrath. Now remember, 2nd Baruch mentions about wrath, the suppression of anger. Okay, and then he saw, it says he saw Samael as well. Saw the seraphim. So very interesting things here. And then it says he saw paradise and hell, which is exactly what 2nd Baruch talked about. So he was on the point of departing from heaven. Celestial voice announced, Moses, you shall now see paradise and Sheol. It says hell, but we'll say Sheol. Okay, hell in the English translation, that says. So Gabriel was sent to show him these things. And he came upon Nesargael, an angel, the angel of Sheol. So he sees the punishments in Sheol. And among the punishments is them not keeping the Sabbath, I think. They profane the Sabbath and the holy days. Okay. Now, then he gets shown paradise. So, Shemshael, the prince of paradise. So then he just gets shown paradise. The living water, the spring of living water. So very amazing information there. And it says, Moses, you are faithful in his house, even as you have seen the reward that is laid up for the pious in the world to come. So also will you be worthy of seeing the life of the world that shall be in the future time. You and all Israel, you shall see the rebuilding of the temple and the advent of the Messiah. Behold the beauty of the Lord and meditate in his temple. So I believe all of this was in the Testament of Moses. So that is some pretty powerful information. Like I said, it corroborates what 2nd Baruch said Moses saw. Let me just show you guys one more time from 2nd Baruch where it said that. It said right here, see, God was taking Moses unto himself, for God showed Moses many things. And then it says this stuff right here. Showed him the measures of the fire, depths of the abyss, weight of the winds, number of the drops of rain, suppression of anger, okay, of judgment, truth of judgment, root of wisdom, greatness of paradise, consummation of the ages, beginning of the day of judgment, okay, mouth of Gehenna, station of vengeance, place of faith. So all this stuff, likeness of future torment, multitude of innumerable angels, the flaming hosts, splendor of the lightnings, voice of the thunders, and the orders of the chiefs of the angels. So this sounds exactly like we just read and looked through in the Midrash of Moses. And it says that he saw that when the burning bush thing happened. So if that's the case, then the Testament of Moses would have had that information. So when we're reconstructing the Testament of Moses, we'll be using those Midrash and putting them in those places. Another thing is we have an actual quote from in 1 Clement that appears to be a quote from the Testament of Moses. I'll share that with you guys. Okay, so share the screen. 1 Clement, we have right here. Let's just look at the context here. Moses was called faithful in all God's house. So this is chapter 17 of 1 Clement. And through his instrumentality, God punished Egypt with plagues and tortures. Yet he, though thus greatly honored, did not adopt lofty language, but said when the divine oracle came to him out of the bush, Who am I that you send me? I am a man of a feeble voice and a slow tongue. And again he said, I am but as the smoke of a pot. This is nowhere in any book of scripture that we know of. This appears to be a quote from the Testament of Moses, where he says to God, Moses says, "I am but as smoke of a pot." So very interesting that. And then we have, on top of that, we have Josephus appears to preserve something else also from the Testament of Moses. That's from the Antiquities of the Jews that he wrote, that lengthy summary of the scriptures. And he claims, so let's look at what he says here. He says that he's not going to add anything to scripture. Whatever he says is in the scriptures of the Jews. So keep that in mind that he says that. So, okay, as I proceed, therefore, I shall accurately describe what is contained in our records and in the order of time that belongs to them. For I have already promised so to do throughout this undertaking, and this without adding anything to what is therein contained or taking away anything therefrom. So he's saying he's going to only say what the scriptures say and nothing else. He's going to faithfully represent what their records say in the scriptures, the Jews. Okay, so with that said, now let's look at what he says their records say about Moses. Okay, we have so he starts off saying, first of all, he starts off with a man whose name was Amram, that's Moses' father, was afraid for his whole nation. So he betook himself to prayer to God and entreated him to have compassion on those men who had no wise transgressed the laws of his worship. This is when they were going to kill all the firstborn, right? So then it says, accordingly God had mercy on him and was moved by his supplication. He stood by him in his sleep and exhorted him not to despair of his future favors. And he said further that he did not forget their piety towards him and would always reward them for it, as he had formerly granted his favor to their forefathers and made them increase from a few to so great a multitude. He put him in mind that when Abraham was come alone out of Mesopotamia into Canaan, he had been made happy, not only in other respects, but that when his wife was at first barren, she was afterwards by him enabled to conceive seed and bear him sons. It's giving a whole thing here that Amram was taught by God or reminded by God. Then it says, when the vision had informed him of these things, Amram awaked and told it to Jochebed, who was his wife. The fear increased upon them on account of the prediction in Amram's dream. There is literally nothing about Amram's dream in the scriptures, in Exodus, or any book of the Old Testament or New Testament. And in Apocrypha as well, we don't see it. So where did Josephus get this idea? Well, he says it was in their scriptures. And we have, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Testament of Amram. And in the Testament of Amram, it talks about, it gives extra visions that, it talks about that Amram had visions. In fact, the scholars call it the visions of Amram. That's the official name that the scholars give the text. So this appears to be Josephus considering the Testament of Amram to be scripture, and he's quoting from it. Okay, and then we got this. Thermuthis was the king's daughter. Where did he get the name of the Pharaoh's daughter? It's not in Exodus. It's not in any other book. But where do we see it? Guess where we see it? We see it in... Watch. I'll show you. Okay, this is the book of Jubilees. Daughter of Pharaoh. Let's see. Right here. In those days, Tharmuth, the daughter of Pharaoh. What did Josephus say it was? Tharmuth. This is a Greek ending. So Josephus was writing in Greek. So the is is just simply an ending. So Tharmuth is the name of the daughter of Pharaoh in Book of Jubilees, and then Josephus said Tharmuth is, again, that's the Greek ending, was the king's daughter. So he's clearly not only using the books that we are familiar with in the Old Testament, he's using other books. So many other places he says things that are not in our copies, and he just adds stuff. But he said he's not going to add anything. He's only going to say what's in the scriptures of the Jews. And then he starts saying things that are found elsewhere only in apocryphal books. So he definitely seems to be accepting apocryphal books as his sources for some of this stuff. So Tharmuthis, or Tharmuth, so that's a corroboration of Jubilees. And it says Moses' beauty was so amazing. You know, nothing of that in the scriptures. Then we see the crown was put on Moses' head, and then Moses threw it down to the ground. Again, that's not in our scriptures, but that Josephus is saying it's in the scriptures. So that probably was in the Testament of Moses. And then when the scribe saw this, and by the way, Josephus also quotes that he says that one of the Egyptians saw that the nativity, the nativity of a future child would bring the dominion of their kingdom low. So the scribe made a violent attempt to kill him, saying, "This, O king, is the child of whom God foretold that if we kill him, we shall be in no danger." But Tharmuthis prevented him and snatched the child away. So again, this whole thing is not in our copies. And then Josephus gives this lengthy account nowhere in our copies. The account is of how Moses fought a war with the Ethiopians on behalf of Egypt. Moses fought for Egypt. So it says, let's see. The Egyptians made use of Moses, and the hope was that Moses would die. It says, like, they basically said, well, we'll have Moses fight in the war, and then if perhaps he will die in the war, and we'll solve the problem. Moses, at the persuasion both of Tharmuthis and the king himself, cheerfully undertook the business. The sacred scribes of both nations were glad, those of the Egyptians that they should at once overcome their enemies by his valor, and that by the same piece of management Moses would be slain, but those of the Hebrews that they should escape from the Egyptians because Moses was to be their general. And then it gives a whole account of Moses fighting the war against the Ethiopians. It says Moses invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve the army safe and without hurt, for he made baskets like unto arks of sedge and filled them with ibes, these like certain types of serpents, and carried them along with them, which animal is the greatest. Oh, it's not, my bad. It says it's the greatest enemy to serpents. I confused that. Okay, and then as soon, therefore, as Moses was come to the land, which was the breeder of the serpents, he let loose the ibes, and by their means repelled the serpentine kind, and used them for his assistance before the army came upon the ground. Okay, then it says he came upon the Ethiopians before they expected him, and joining battle with them, he beat them and deprived them of the hopes they had of a success against the Egyptians, and went on in overthrowing their cities, and indeed made a great slaughter of these Ethiopians. Now, when the Egyptian army had once tasted of this prosperous success by the means of Moses, they did not slacken their diligence, insomuch that the Ethiopians were in danger of being reduced to slavery and all sorts of destruction. And at length they retired to Saba, which is a royal city of Ethiopia. Okay. Then it says, however, while Moses was uneasy at the armies lying idle, this accident happened. Tharbus was the daughter of the king of the Ethiopians. She happened to see Moses as he led the army near the walls and fought with great courage, and admiring the subtlety of his undertakings and believing him to be the author of the Egyptian success, when they had before despaired of recovering their liberty, and to be the occasion of the great danger the Ethiopians were in, when they had before boasted of their great achievements, she fell deeply in love with him, and upon the prevalency of that passion, sent to him the most faithful of all her servants to discourse with him about their marriage. He thereupon accepted the offer, on condition she would procure the delivering up of the city, and gave her the assurance of an oath to take her to his wife, to be his wife, and that when he had once taken possession of the city, he would not break his oath to her. No sooner was the agreement made, but it took effect immediately. And when Moses had cut off the Ethiopians, he gave thanks to God and consummated his marriage and led the Egyptians back to their own land. So that whole thing, nowhere in our copies of Scripture, Josephus says it's in Scripture. So either he just made it up, which just doesn't make sense, or he got it from a book. And what book is there other than the Testament of Moses? So I believe this account was from the Testament of Moses. And in the New Testament, it actually says Moses was mighty in a way that doesn't fit with what we see, but fits very much this account. So Moses being mighty in works, mighty in deeds. Let me see, where did it say that? Moses being mighty. Let's see. That's an Acts. Mighty in words and deeds. So being mighty sounds like a war type of thing, a strength, physical strength. So with that said, that's some pretty powerful stuff of how do we reconstruct the Testament of Moses? Well, we're using all these sources. So so to reconstruct it all, hold on, is my okay, I want to make sure my feed is not stalling. But okay, so how we reconstruct this is we use Josephus' account to fill in some of the Testament of Moses, and we can use Josephus to reconstruct some of the Testament of Amram, by the way, as well. So Testament of Moses, we use Josephus' account for the how Moses threw the crown down, how Moses, how he did the war against the Ethiopians. We will use the Midrash to reconstruct the visions he saw at the burning bush. We got that quote from Book of Clement. We will fill that in. And then we also have stuff from the Pentateuch. We have things in Exodus and Numbers. So probably some of that information was in the Testament of Moses. But we have to keep in mind that according to the church writers, the Testament of Moses was only 1,100 lines. So that means that Moses did not give a full lengthy account of everything that happened in his life. So he probably did not give an account of the Passover, of them leaving the Exodus. He just went for specific highlights of his life. Very specific things he focused on. So we know he focused on the burning bush incident. He probably talked about how he was born. He may have mentioned the plagues, the 10 plagues. He might have given an account of that. And there might have been a couple incidents in his life that he spoke on. Although alternatively, depending how big the Testament of Moses gets, because remember, 1,100 lines, that's our guide. So if we're putting in the visions, we're putting in the story of the Ethiopian war, and it gets way too big, then we know we messed up and we reconstructed it with too much stuff. The Testament of Aaron, which we talked about, that probably existed. A lot of the stuff that could fit in Testament of Moses could also fit in Testament of Aaron, like the plagues. Remember, because Aaron, on Moses' behalf, did the plagues. Aaron spoke for Moses. So, if too much is being tried to fit into the Testament of Moses, we know that it wasn't part of the Testament of Moses, but it was probably from the Testament of Aaron, because the Testament of Aaron would have covered the same life experiences that Moses went through as well. Um, so, but we can use Numbers in Exodus to kind of fill in anything missing that seems to be missing, and then put it all together, and we have the Testament of Moses in the basic form. Obviously, because we don't have an actual manuscript, we can't reconstruct the exact wording that Moses said, but we can reconstruct the substance of the Testament of Moses, the basic gist. We can put it in his own words, Moses speaking in first person, but we would not have the Testament of Moses was not a full account of his life. It did not go through everything that happened to Moses in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It just spoke on specific things, very specific things, to teach his sons values and learn about the truth of the future, like from prophecy and things like that. So anyways, that's the basic thing we have there. Then we have the Testament of Joshua and the Chronicles of Joshua. So the book of Joshua, as we know it, I just call it the Chronicles of Joshua. And the reason I call it that is because I don't believe the book of Joshua was written by Joshua. I believe it was written by later writer in the time of Solomon. But there's another book, there's an Apocryphon of Joshua, but we have fragments of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I believe that this, whether it's a Testament of Joshua or Book of Joshua, whatever it was, that was the source of the Book of Joshua that we have. Overall, I'd say the Book of Joshua we have is well preserved, whether it's Masoretic or Septuagint. There's not too many major differences between them. There are some significant ones, but nothing too crazy that would suggest that Joshua's text has to be radically altered from what we have to reconstruct it. So I would say Joshua is well preserved. Similarly with Book of Judges, I think it's well preserved. Maybe the order might be a little bit off, and there might be a few things corrupted that needs to be reconstructed. But overall, I'd say Joshua and Judges was preserved pretty well. Book of Ruth, I think, was probably part of the Book of Judges originally. So one thing, though, I will mention about the Testament of Joshua, something interesting, is that we have something from the New Testament that is nowhere in our copies of the Old Testament, but seems to be derived from a Testament of Joshua of some kind, or Apocryphon of Joshua. And that is, let's see, is it Luke? One second here. Whoops, my bad. 1 second. 1 sec. It's in Luke, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's in Matthew. I remember now. All right, Matthew genealogy. So let's share the screen. From what Matthew says. All right, so we have here in the list of genealogy, we have a few instances where it says the wife. So we have Joseph and his wife Mary, right? Then we have David and his wife Uriah. Not Bathsheba. Who? Why is it? Okay, I guess the text says by her who was of Uriah. But my bad for saying David's wife was Uriah. Okay, and then we have Tamar. And the reason that all these women are being mentioned is that due to the fact that they were their history of like their sexual history is why the women are mentioned. So for example, Mary is mentioned because she's a virgin. She's never had sex. Then The wife of Uriah is mentioned because of adultery. Tamar is mentioned because of prostitution. That just leaves, and that leaves Rahab as well. Rahab, oh yeah, and also Ruth. Ruth was from the Moabites, and according to that, the Moabites were from incest. So Ruth is mentioned because of incest from her DNA. Her lineage is incest. Rahab is mentioned because, as well, she was a harlot, a prostitute. Now, this tells us Salmon, the father of Boaz, married Rahab. Where do we see this? Nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that Rahab was the wife of Salmon and begot Boaz. So Matthew's getting this seemingly from nowhere. I believe he got it from the Apocryphon of Joshua or the Testament of Joshua. Whether it was a Testament or Apocryphon doesn't really matter overall. But basically, it would have been the account of Joshua in his own words. So, and we have the fragments of this in Dead Sea Scrolls, and there are some fragments from Masada as well. I don't know if they've been translated yet, but we have fragments of it from Masada as well. So we can take the book of Joshua, because if Joshua was written by later writers, where did they get that information? They got it from the book of Joshua, the earlier book of Joshua, the Apocryphon of Joshua. So basically, the Apocryphon of Joshua would have been the same basic story of Joshua, but just a longer version. So, what do we see here? We see the story of where they cross over the Jordan, the whole account of Rahab. So there was, Joshua has about Rahab. Well, there would have been even more about Rahab in some of these other books, either in the book of Joshua or in a later book. And then we have where the Jericho incident, with the circumcision of the Israelites. Okay, we got that. The destruction of Jericho. And then the sin of Akar or Akan. Treaty with the Gibeonites. The sun standing still. Okay, so these were all things that would have been talked about in greater detail. The wars of Joshua against these kings. So all this would have been in greater detail. So this just gives very quick information. So you see right here, it's like where it says, Joshua took Makkedah and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. They fought against Libnah, and the Lord also delivered it and its king into the hand of Israel. He struck it and all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword. He let none remain in it, but did to it its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. So probably in the Apocryphon of Joshua, there was much more to this story, a good amount more. A more detail to the wars that were done. So then, let's see. Then there was there's a division of the land as well. But anyway, so it appears that archives of Joshua are just a shortened version of the original text, in my view. So now the reason I say this is because I believe in this Apocryphon of Joshua as authentic. So why would Joshua write two books that say the same thing? It doesn't make sense. So probably this book of Joshua that we have is a later writing. And the Septuagint actually has things from Solomon's time, which indicates that it was, if those are authentic variants, they're not in the Masoretic text, but they are in the Septuagint version, and they have statements from Solomon's time. It would indicate that the book was authored in the Solomon's time. Let me just share the screen show you guys one portion of the Apocryphon of Joshua, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Let's see here. there is one very interesting thing which is actually quoted in the Dead Sea Scrolls as a prophecy of the wicked, a future wicked person. So 1 second here. And we've been going for a long time, so I'm not sure how long we'll be going. Okay, so we have here, let me share the screen now. Dead Sea Scrolls. All right. So here we have Apocryphon of Joshua, that the scholars call it, 4Q379. There's various fragments. Okay, let's go to the next page. So here we have the first month of the 41st year of their departure from the land of Egypt. It was the year of the Jubilees at the start of their entry into the land of Canaan, and the Jordan was full with water towards all its banks, and it flooded with its water from the month until the month of the wheat harvest. Okay, so that's from the Apocryphon of Joshua. Interesting. Let's see. Now, just to keep in mind that sometimes the scholars put fragments together and they may not always be 100% from the same scroll. So fragment 12 seems pretty clear to be from Joshua. Fragment 4, I'd have to see why they consider it part of it. We don't know, without looking into what the scholars say why, we can't say just by looking at it why it would be a Joshua fragment or not. Because sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's not 100% certain the fragment does fit with it. Same thing right here. Although this could very well be with mentioning Eleazar and Ithamar. Like this right here. There's nothing specific that's connected with Joshua. So the only reason to think that this is from the Joshua Apocryphon is if we can clearly see that it's the same scroll. If there's evidence, physical evidence that it's the same scroll. But now we do have fragment 22, 2 columns, and we know for sure that this is indeed from the Joshua Apocryphon. So here's what it says. So column 1, it says, his mighty deeds, he has no refuge. Okay, I understand. No God apart from him. There is no. Okay, it's very fragmentary, all right? Then it says, blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel. Okay, at the moment when Joshua finished praising and giving thanks with his psalms. So here we have an extra psalm of Joshua, not even anywhere in our copies. And it says, he said, cursed be the man who rebuilds this city. Upon his firstborn he will found it, and with his youngest son he will erect its gates. And now cursed be the man of Belial, who rises to be a fowler's trap for his people, and ruin for all his neighbors. And there will arise, there's some things missing, to be the 2 instruments of violence, and they will rebuild this city, and erect for it a rampart and towers, to make it into a fortress of wickedness in the country, and a great evil amongst the sons of Jacob. And they will shed blood in Israel, and a horror in Ephraim and Judah. And they will commit a profanation in the land, and a great blasphemy among the sons. All right, this is, they're saying this part here was added here, or was put here and should have been here or something. They think, the scholars think. They will commit profanation in the land and great blasphemy among the sons of Jacob, and they will shed blood like water upon the ramparts of the daughter of Zion and in the precincts of Jerusalem. So this is a full lecture thing, not in our copies. The only thing that's in our copies is where it says, cursed be the man who rebuilds the city. Let me look that up. What chapter was that? Yeah, so let me share the screen. That is from chapter 6 of Joshua. And you can see already, just from that one fragment, that it was significantly longer portion than what we have in our copies. So we take a look right here. Joshua had said to the two men who had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house. Okay, so this was right after. This was right after Jericho. This is when Jericho was destroyed. So right after it's destroyed, then it says Joshua charged at that time, saying, "Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city, Jericho. And he shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the country. So the Apocryphon of Joshua has a psalm that Joshua sings after they have victory over Jericho, and then he has a lengthy curse. It says, "Cursed be the man who does this," and then it gives a prophecy of a long prophecy of when this will happen, how this will happen. So this one little thing we see is it was significantly longer in the Apocryphon of Joshua, and if that's longer there, then probably the rest of the book too was a longer version of Joshua, a much longer story. So all that to say, we can take, we can kind of use the book of Joshua as a guide to reconstructing the Apocryphon of Joshua. But because we have so little of the Apocryphon of Joshua, we will only be able to have a loose idea of what the original text may have said. Oh, let me go back just to show you guys that it's actually quoted elsewhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls as like a prophecy. In this document called, it's a scroll 4Q175. It's various testimonies that are, usually it's being linked to the Messiah. So here we have, "I will raise up for them a prophet." That's often linked as a messianic prophecy, like in the New Testament. A prophet like Moses is considered a messianic prophecy. Then the prophecy of Balaam, where it says, "A star from Jacob, a scepter shall arise from Israel." So that is considered a messianic prophecy. But then it goes into this, and it says, "At the moment when Joshua finished praising and giving thanks for the Psalms, he said, 'Cursed be the man who rebuilds this city. Upon his firstborn will he found it, and upon his youngest son will he erect its gates. And now an accursed man, one of Belial, will arise to be a fowler's trap for his people and ruin for all his neighbors.'" Okay. So when you saw them filling in pieces in the other manuscript, you might have wondered, how are they filling all this in? How are they reconstructing this? Because they were using this scroll, because it literally quotes the same passage. So we can use this to reconstruct that other scroll that had some of the portions missing. And we can use that scroll to reconstruct the missing portions in this scroll of the quote. So that's kind of how scholars do this. They take the two different manuscripts, and the manuscript that has the one reading, the other manuscript doesn't have, and the other manuscript has the reading that the other one doesn't have, and then the manuscripts sometimes have the same reading overlapping, so they use all that and put it together, and that they fill in the lines, so anything in brackets is reconstructed either from a different manuscript or from context. They try to reconstruct what it probably said. Now, I will note that interestingly, it says, "the man who rebuilds this city," whereas our copies say in Joshua, "who rebuilds this city Jericho." Evidence indicates from the Dead Sea Scrolls that the original text did not say Jericho. So book of Joshua has added the name Jericho into the text. So the Apocryphon of Joshua actually preserves the older text. So we can use the Apocryphon of Joshua to reconstruct the text here as not saying Jericho. Even though the Septuagint and Masoretic both say Jericho, probably. Septuagint probably says that as well. Even though Actually, I want to look that up just in case. Brenton Joshua, chapter 6. Let's see if it says the name. One second here. Actually, it doesn't. In the Septuagint, it just says that city. So the Septuagint actually corroborates, the Septuagint agrees with the Apocryphon of Joshua in not saying the city name. And that's one of the that's a common scribal thing where a name is added to clarify. We've talked about this in my series on going through the manuscript, Septuagint versus Masoretic, and how the name clarifications are later scribal additions. So Apocryphon of Joshua and Septuagint preserve the original text of just this city and not this city Jericho, as the Masoretic has it. Anyways, all that said, we move on to the next section. So now we have, Book of Judges, right? So let me show you guys something for a sec from the Book of Judges. Something that just cannot be true, cannot be valid. What I mean is cannot be the original text of the stories of the Judges. So watch. So we have the different accounts of the Judges, right? So we have different ones. So we have Othniel. He judged Israel. Usually it'll say how long they judged and then how many years had rest. Okay, Ehud judged. Then we have Tola. Now here, look. He judged Israel 23 years and he died and was buried in Shamir. Then Jair. He judged Israel 22 years. And it says he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. They also had 30 towns. That's it? That's all you're going to tell us? What about the things he judged? You're not going to tell us what he did? There surely had to be a story about Jair. And there surely had to be a story about Tola. It says there arose to save Israel Tola. So Tola saved Israel. Where's the account of that? We need the account. What happened? Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. So we have the account of it. Then we have, after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons. He gave away 30 daughters. So what did he do? Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. Again, what did he do? Abdon, he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. Why even tell us that? What's the point of telling us that? There must have been something else he did. So he had something significant about it. But why not tell us about it? Samson judged, okay. Oh yeah, and it skipped to one too. Look at this, Shamgar. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad. He also saved Israel or delivered Israel. Wait a minute. There had to be a story to that. So what's going on here? Something had to happen. So with what we have, so far we're noticing a pattern where every book we have, there was longer accounts that once existed, giving more information to the story. So clearly there must have been, like, see, we have Genesis Apocryphon right here, books of the patriarchs that are the sources of Genesis. So if we also have Joshua, which is the Apocryphon of Joshua was the source of Joshua, then also we probably had something similar for Judges, where there was probably a Judges Apocryphon composed of different books. And we already saw the theme here of Testament of Levi, the priestly testament, then Kohath, priestly testament, Amram, priestly testament. Aaron would have been another priestly testament. So then his sons would have also had priestly testaments. Testament of Eleazar is the son of Aaron. Then Phinehas, Abishua, Buki, Uzi. So these are the high priests during the time of the Judges. And what best way to tell the story of the Judges? Probably through the story the mouth of the high priests. I can't tell you definitively that's the case, but that would be the best way to explain it, because otherwise we would have a situation where every judge would have had his own book, and that doesn't make sense. Because, by the way, in our reconstruction of how many books are part of the Bible, I rely on Second Esdras, because it says there were only 70 books, secret books, prior to the time of when Second Esdras was written. Second Esdras was written during the Babylonian exile. So that means there could have only been 70 apocryphal books prior to that. So we can't have too many books of the Judges. There had to be a few. So there had to be a few which covered multiple judges. And the best way I could see that was books written by the priests. Maybe instead of a testament, maybe it would have been a book. So maybe it would have been Book of Eleazar. But whether it was testament or book, it would have covered the account of the judges. Okay. Then we have a testament of Solomon. If we have a testament of Solomon, there almost certainly was also a testament of David. We have very little to go on for testament of David, but I strongly believe that there was some kind of testament of David. So we would try to reconstruct in a broad way what the testament of David might have looked like. But importantly, we do note that the events of David's life were referred to in the books of the prophets. Same thing with Solomon as well. Testament of Solomon, I believe it's redacted but reconstructible. So in the current form, Testament of Solomon has some Christian additions and also some Greek stuff that seems not original to the text. So I believe we can reconstruct, generally speaking, what the original Testament of Solomon was. We have two striking endorsements of the Testament of Solomon. One is how the New Testament, Yeshua actually endorses the Testament of Solomon. Solomon's power over the demons, he refers to that story in the New Testament. Then secondly, Josephus actually endorses the Testament of Solomon as authentic. Let me show you. And again, remember, Josephus said that this is part of the Jewish scripture. He's not adding anything. He's simply saying what the Jewish scriptures say. And yet he's quoting apocryphal books. So here's Josephus's confirmation of the Testament of Solomon. It says, so this is talking about Solomon right here. God also enabled him to learn that skill which expels demons, which is a science useful and sanative to men. He composed such incantations also by which distempers are alleviated. He left behind to him the manner of using exorcisms, by which they drive away demons, so that they never return. And this method of cure is of great force unto this day. Then he gives an account of how a Jew cast out a demon using Solomon's instructions. So it says the man put a ring that had a foot, one of those sorts mentioned by Solomon, to the nostrils of the person who was demon possessed. After which he drew out the demon through his nostrils, and when the man fell down immediately, he abjured him to return into him no more, making still mention of Solomon, and reciting the incantations which he composed. So it says here, and when this was done by the man, that he cast the demon out, the skill and wisdom of Solomon was shown very manifestly, for which reason it is that all men may know the vastness of Solomon's abilities, and how he was beloved of God, and that the extraordinary virtues of every kind with which this king was endowed may not be unknown to any people under the sun for this reason. So very clearly here, Josephus corroborates the testament of Solomon as authentic, but it would have been a less Christian. It would have not been a Christianized version like the one we have. Okay, so now with that said, let's look at something. So we have here, one second here. Okay, let me share the screen now. So the Old Testament refers to a lot of different books that says, go to this book for more information, go to this book for more information. So we have 1 Kings chapter 11, 41. The rest of the acts of Solomon, all he did, his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? Now, it's not clear exactly what this book is referring to. It could be the Testament of Solomon or some other book that we don't even know. But clearly there was another book that had more information about the deeds of Solomon. And the reason I said Testament of Solomon is because that records the deeds of Solomon in that. So that's a very interesting thing. But here we have the book of Kings refers to the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. But 1st and 2nd Chronicles, or 2nd Chronicles, refers to written in the book of the Kings of Israel and Judah. So isn't that interesting? We have 3 different books referred to. Book of the Kings of Israel, book of the Kings of Judah, and the book of the Kings of Israel and Judah. Well, you know what's interesting? 1st and 2nd Kings gives the accounts of both Kings of Israel and Kings of Judah. But 1st and 2nd Chronicles gives the account of the kings only from the Kings of Judah. So it appears to be the case that whenever 2nd Chronicles is mentioning the book of the Kings of Israel and Judah, or Judah and Israel, that's referring to 1st and 2nd Kings. And when 1st and 2nd Kings refers to the books of the Chronicles of Judah, that appears to be referring to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, because it matches the exact character of the book. But that leaves, if the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah is 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and if the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah is 1st and 2nd Kings, what is the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? I believe, based on this, that there was another book of Chronicles, which was only about the Kings of Israel. So we would have, just like we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it gives more information about the Judah kings. We would have a book of Chronicles that gives more information about just the Israelite kings. And it would have been a longer, so the reign of the kings ends around, of Israel ends around the time of Hezekiah. That's still a good 150 years or so before the destruction of the first temple. So 1st and 2nd Chronicles goes all the way to the end of the first temple being destroyed. But the events, if there was a book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, that would have only gone to the time when Israel was destroyed as a nation. And that would have been in the time of Hezekiah, when the kingdom of Israel was destroyed. The Samaria was destroyed. So how would we reconstruct that lost book of the Chronicles? Well, we would use 1st and 2nd Kings, and we would use Chronicles. In that, Chronicles gives us a picture of what the general character of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel would have looked like. As we're about to find out, we're going to see that each of the kings' reigns, the earlier kings' reigns, were written by prophets. So notice, we'll see. Let me bring it down. Okay. It starts in Chronicles. Okay, so 1 Chronicles 29:29, the acts of King David, first and last. Indeed, they are written in the book of Samuel the seer, the book of Nathan the prophet, and the book of Gad the seer. So this tells us that, now some people try to say that there's not books outside the Bible, blah, blah, blah. But this is very clear, telling us that there were other books that wrote other information and that they were truly written by those prophets. And that it gives the true account of those instances, like the Acts of David. If you want to know more, go to those books. That's an authoritative endorsement of those books as truth. So if those are true books and they're books of prophecy, then they're scripture. So we have Samuel the seer, Nathan the prophet, and Gad the seer. Then for Solomon, the rest of the Acts of Solomon, first and last, are they not written in the book of Nathan the prophet, the prophecy of Ahijah, and the visions of Iddo the seer concerning Jeroboam? The Acts of Rehoboam, are they not written in the book of Shemaiah the prophet, and of Iddo the seer concerning genealogies? and there were wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all their days. And the rest of the acts of Abijah, his ways and his sayings, are written in the annals of the prophet Iddo. So notice what we've got so far here. Samuel only wrote about David, and not the later kings. Nathan, actually, though, wrote about both David and Solomon. Gad, however, it says mainly wrote about only David. It doesn't say about Solomon. But now let's look at Solomon. It says Ahijah and Iddo. So then we go down, and for Rehoboam, there's Shemaiah and Iddo. And then for Abijah, there's also Iddo. So we have Iddo writing about 3 different people. So we can use this. We can use the events from Solomon's life, from Rehoboam's life, and Abijah's life to have an idea of what the book of Iddo said. Then we see Iddo wrote about genealogies. So you know how First and Second Chronicles, or First Chronicles has genealogies in it? Well, it seems like Iddo, his book mentioned genealogies. So probably genealogies of David, or who knows, it probably had information about that. And so we can use that for reconstruction purposes. Visions of Iddo. So Iddo had visions, he was a seer, and he had visions about Jeroboam. So now we know that not just about Solomon, but also about Jeroboam, he had visions. Ahijah was apparently it was primarily or only about Solomon. Shemaiah likewise apparently was only about Rehoboam. But when we go to Asa, there's no prophet book. It's just Book of the Kings of Judah and Israel. So that's First and Second Kings. Then here we have the rest of Jehoshaphat. There's a book of the prophet Jehu, son of Hanani, who is mentioned in the Book of the Kings of Israel. So Jehu would have been in the Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Okay, and then we have, let's see, Amaziah, written in the Book of the Kings of Judah and Israel, so that's First and Second Kings. Jotham, First and Second Kings. The rest of his acts, also in First and Second Kings. Now we have the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and his goodness. Indeed, they are written in the vision of Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, in the Book of Kings of Judah and Israel. So it's found in First and Second Kings, and it's in the vision of Isaiah the prophet. Then we have the rest of the acts of Manasseh, his prayer to his God and the word of the seers. They're in the Book of the Kings of Israel, so the Chronicles of Israel, that lost Chronicles, potentially. But also it says, now, when I searched this, it didn't give us every instance. So hold on. Maybe I need to search it better. Written. Let's try written. Okay, it's not showing that there. Let's see what it says, because I know it says something right after in the next verse. Verse 33, it says, oh wait, I'm sorry, that's I'm looking for Manasseh's one. Okay, the prayer. His prayer and how he received his entreaty and all his sin and trespass, they are written among the sayings of Haggai. They also say, Septuagint says the seers. So the sayings of the seers, the prayer of Manasseh is written in that. And so the prayer of Manasseh, we know from the Apocrypha. So the prayer of Manasseh is corroborated in Second Chronicles. Okay, and then there was one that we missed. That was another thing that Isaiah said. Hold on. Where's the other one? I thought Isaiah. It mentions Isaiah. Let me just see. Isaiah. One sec, guys. All right, here it is. The rest of the acts of Isaiah from first to last, the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, wrote. Our copies of Isaiah do not have anything about Isaiah in it. All it says is the vision of Isaiah in the days of Isaiah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And then in one place it says, in the year that Isaiah died, I saw a vision. That does not fit what we saw, what it says. It says the rest of the acts of Isaiah, what the deeds are, what Isaiah did, the prophet Isaiah wrote, but it's not in the book of Isaiah. So there was some Apocrypha Isaiah book which contained a fuller account of what Isaiah did. So, at any rate, using all this information, we see very clearly that there were other books. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. Shalom. So when we go to the right here for the reconstructed thing, first of all, Gad the Seer, we did find that a couple hundred years ago, and that has been published into English for the first time about, 5, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. It was published within the last 10 years, finally in first English translation. From what I can tell, it seems to be well preserved. And it covers the events of David's life, although there's like one or two stories from Solomon's life, but not enough to be regarded as the rest, the acts of Solomon. Because it said for the acts of Solomon, go to Nathan and Ahijah and Iddo. But for Gad, it just says that for David. But in Gad the Seer, it has a little information about Solomon. So that's why I was saying sometimes apparently it's only about this person, because since I believe Gad the Seer is authentic, that leaves open the possibility that some of these books may have had small amount of information from another king, but not enough to consider it the acts of that king. So Gad the Seer we don't really need to reconstruct it because we have it. Samuel the Seer, on the other hand, we do need to reconstruct it. And how will we reconstruct it? Well, first of all, First Samuel has striking amount of information, almost exclusively about Samuel, David, and Saul. So what we can tell is that the book of Samuel the Seer was primarily about, it was only about Saul and David. Secondly, it was primarily about everything up until David became king. Once he actually became king and Saul died, now the other prophets take over because Samuel was already dead. The vision of Samuel when he spoke to Saul after he died probably was in the book of Samuel the Seer, but it's hard to see how Samuel could have written about the prophecy when he was dead. So, I'm not sure whether that was actually part of the book of Samuel the Seer or part of the book of Nathan. So when I reconstruct it, I had to decide whether it's going to be part of the book of Samuel or book of Nathan. Because, again, there was that conundrum of if Samuel wrote it, how could he have written about when Saul talked with it, Samuel? And then, but another thing to keep in mind is that how do we even know about this in the first place? Who wrote about it? Because Saul was the only one with that woman. So either the woman then later on told David about it. David may have summoned the woman and said, what happened? And the woman testified and said, he summoned Samuel. Something like that. Or maybe a later prophet revealed that it happened, Nathan or something. So it's one of those two. But so that's a kind of a debatable thing about whether it was part of the book of Samuel the Seer or not. I'm leaning towards that it was, but not 100% certain. So then we have also, he probably prophesied about events in David's life. Samuel may have prophesied about future things that David was going to do later on, perhaps. We actually have a quote of the book of Samuel the seer in the New Testament that I'm going to show you guys in a second. But also, interestingly, we have something, the story of the Gibeonites. Let me show you guys that. The story of the Gibeonites is not mentioned in Samuel, 1 Samuel, but it's implied that something happened, but it never tells us. So there must have been a book that told us about it. So the account is 2 Samuel chapter 21. This is when David avenges the Gibeonites. So there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, "It is because of Saul and the bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." But guess what? 1 Samuel is the only book that records what Saul did, and nowhere is it mentioned in 1 Samuel that Saul killed Gibeonites. So that's very random. It's almost like 2 Samuel assumes we already know the story, and we didn't need to tell us the first time. So that's very odd. But I believe that the book of Samuel the seer had the full account of this. And interestingly, let me look at the lives of the prophets for a second. 1 second here. Samuel. Hold on a second. I thought the lives of the prophets had an account of Samuel. That's weird. Hold on. Okay, so I guess it wasn't Samuel. It looks like it's Nathan. So it says Nathan in the lives of the prophets, it says he was from Gibeon. So Nathan was a Gibeonite prophet. Interesting. So that means that this would have been a significant story in these extra books, because if Nathan was from it, then it would have been a traumatic part of his life that happened. So either it was from the book of Samuel the seer, where it had an account of the Gibeonite slaughter, or the book of Nathan. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's possible that it would better fit book of Nathan due to the fact that Nathan was from Gibeon. So Nathan would have had the more personal reason to mention Gibeon. So let me just see one thing. Yeah. So, anyways, that's according to the lives of the prophets. So I don't think that's coincidence. But with that said, there is also another thing that says it says that Samuel commanded something. 1 second. It's in 2 Chronicles. Okay, I guess it's not Samuel. I'm sorry. I'm getting some of it. I'm misremembering some of it. It was Gad that commanded it, it looks like. 1 sec. Okay. Oh, here's one. It says 1 Chronicles chapter 9. Let me share the screen. It says that Samuel appointed people right here. All those chosen as gatekeepers, they were recorded by their genealogy. David and Samuel the seer had appointed them to their trusted office. Okay, so that's something Samuel did there. Let's see. One sec. All right, now this is Acts chapter 3. All the prophets from Samuel and those who follow, as many as have spoken, have also foretold these days. That implies that that the book of Samuel the seer had some messianic prophecy of some kind. These days, Moses said to the fathers, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren." Okay, that's referred to that's a prophecy they say of the Messiah. And then who's talking here? Peter then says, all prophets from Samuel and those who follow have foretold these days. So he was reading from the book of Samuel where it foretold these days. Now, God found a man after his own heart. So let's see here. Where does it say that? Now, this is Samuel talking to Saul. So watch. Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." So this is Samuel speaking to Saul about what God priorly, on a previous occasion, had said. But where's the previous thing he said? We don't have it. Nowhere is it mentioned in 1 Samuel. But now, watch this. My own heart. So now, Acts chapter 13. Now this is Paul apparently quoting the book of Samuel. So look at this. After that, he gave judges until Samuel the prophet. And afterward, they asked for a king, so God gave them Saul, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, "I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will." So this is God speaking about David. The other quote we saw was Samuel rebuking Saul and saying, "God has chosen for himself a man after his own heart. You are not that man." Here, Samuel is saying, "I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do my will, all my will." So this is not quoting 1 Samuel. This is quoting something else. And what else is he quoting other than book of Samuel the seer? So we can use this stuff to help us have an idea of how to reconstruct the book of Samuel the seer. Another thing we will use for the reconstruction purpose for Samuel the seer is from the Psalms. Now, from the book of Gad the seer, we saw that the Psalms are, there's a few Psalms embedded in the book of Gad the seer as part of the narrative. In 2 Samuel, we also see one of the Psalms incorporated into the text. But now watch. Let's see what some of these Psalms say. Okay, so Psalm of David. The Psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. When did this happen? This happened during the time of after Samuel had died. So this would be from the book of Nathan. So the book of Nathan, I believe 100%, the book of Nathan had this Psalm in full. So when I reconstruct the book of Nathan, it's going to have this Psalm in it. Because I believe this is where we get the information. A Psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. How do we know that? So the question, why does it say David wrote certain Psalms, but elsewhere it doesn't tell us why or who wrote it? Like in many of the other Psalms, it doesn't say David wrote it. But why does it say it in some places? Well, I think these titles are not part. They are not original. They're added by later scribes. So this title was added because they knew that in the apocryphal books, this psalm was sung when this happened. So in the book of Nathan the prophet, when David fled from Absalom his son, he sung this song, and it's recorded in the book of Nathan the prophet. It would have been, I believe. And so then the scribes of the book of Psalms said, okay, we know that he sung this when he fled from Absalom his son. So let's add that as a title to tell people. All right, and then we're only looking at the ones that are specific historical things. So here's another one: Meditation of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning the words of Cush, a Benjamite. This is something that we don't have any reference to in the scriptures. This refers to something we don't know what it's talking about. So it's completely extra story. We have no idea. But this would have been another psalm. So this probably would have been from the book of Samuel the Seer, because it's a Benjaminite. So it probably would have been related to Saul, because Saul was a Benjamite. So this psalm and a story about Cush would have been in the book of Samuel the Seer. Then we have, let's see here. So this one, Psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Let me see for a second, because I think that's quoted in 2 Samuel. Hold on. Let's see. Where is it? 2 Samuel 22. So it's interesting because it sounds like that this is from the book of Samuel, but it's actually, according to 2 Samuel, it's way later, from the book of Nathan. So we would include this in the book of Nathan. Then we have, let's see here. When he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. I believe that's also from the Samuel the Seer, when he was running away from Saul. Okay, now let's keep going. Okay, Psalm of David when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. So we know that would have been from book of Nathan the prophet. Okay, David when Doeg the Edomite went and told Saul and said to him, David has gone to the house of Ahimelech. So this psalm would have been from the book of Samuel the Seer. Here's another one from book of Samuel the Seer. When the Ziphites went and said to Saul, is David not hiding with us? Here's another one from book of Samuel the Seer. When the Philistines captured him in Gath. And then another one from Samuel the Seer, a miktam of David when he fled from Saul into the cave. So when I reconstruct the book of Samuel the Seer, all these psalms are going to also be included in it. In my belief, they were all part of these lost book of Samuel the Seer. A miktam of David when Saul sent men and they watched the house in order to kill him. Again, that'll be in Samuel the Seer. When he fought against Mesopotamia and Syria of Zobah, and Joab returned and killed 12,000 Edomites. I think that would be from book of Nathan the prophet. When he fled, okay, that's from the beginning. So, with all that said, that's the basic. I'm going to be using the Psalms for that. Let me just see. It only went to the first 70 Psalms or so. So let me just quickly look, see if there's any other ones that we missed. David. Yeah, there's no other ones. But there is one in the Dead Sea Scrolls and that is Psalm 151. So let me share the screen for that. Whoops, wrong one. Okay. So we're going to look at this too in a second, right here. But here we have an Alleluia of David, son of Jesse. I was smaller than my brothers and the youngest of my father's sons. He made me shepherd of his flock and ruler over his kid goats. So this is an account of when David was or anointed by Samuel. So this would have been from the book of Samuel the seer. And then this next Psalm, 151b, would have been when he killed Goliath. Okay, and then there was a few other Psalms where he kills the goat, or not the goat, excuse me. It's from the extra Syriac Psalms. 152 to 155. So let's see. One second here. All right, let me share the screen now. All right, so we have here spoken by David when he was contending with the lion and the wolf, which took a sheep from his flock. Okay, so that would have been when David was young. And spoken by David when returning thanks to God, who would deliver him from the lion and the wolf. And he had slain both of them. So that would have also been from the book of Samuel the seer. So with all that said, we will use these Psalms as well as the events from 1 Samuel, kind of have put together a picture of what the book of Samuel the seer would look like. So that's why I say lost but reconstructible. God the seer, we don't need to reconstruct. That brings us to Nathan the prophet. So Nathan the prophet, we have a couple of interesting things. One is from the lives of the prophets. It gives us extra information that I believe is from the book of Nathan the prophet. So that is, let's zoom in. Okay, Nathan. He was David's prophet. He was from Gibeon of a Hivite clan, and it was he who taught the king of the law of the Lord. He foresaw David's sin with Bathsheba and set out in haste to warn him. But Satan thwarted his attempt. He found lying by the road the naked body of a man who had been slain, and while he was detained by this duty, he knew that in that night the king had committed the sin. So he turned back to Gibeon in sorrow. Then when David caused the death of Bathsheba's husband, the Lord sent Nathan to convict him. He lived to an advanced old age, and when he died, he was buried in his own land. So, with all that said, we have a striking story where it is not in our text at all. It definitely sounds like an apocryphal book. It mentions Belial or Beliar as the name of Satan. Nathan actually foresaw in prophecy by a dream or whatnot the sin of David, that he was going to sin with Bathsheba. And so he went out by command of God to warn David and tell him to stop and to not do the sin. But because of Satan causing someone to be murdered, Nathan had to obey the law, which commands the people who find the body to go to the nearest city and get help to determine who was killed, who was the murderer, things of that nature. So because of that ended up causing Nathan not to be able to go to David and stop him, prevent him from doing the sin. Nathan was going to warn him that if he does this, he will be forsaken by God, but he did not get the opportunity to do this. So this is a peculiar thing from the Book of Nathan that we don't have in our copies, but it would have been part of the Book of Nathan. So we will use that as a reconstruction of the Book of Nathan. We already talked about some of the Psalms will be used for reconstruction of the Book of Nathan. And then we have there's something called the Apocalypse of Stephen. And that quotes from the Book of Nathan the Prophet. So let me show you. It says, these are various prophecies claiming to be like virgin birth prophecies or whatever, prophecy of the Messiah. In the law and the prophets spake, of Christ. In the first law and the second and the other books it is written, when the year of the covenant comes, I will send my beloved angel, a good spirit of sonship, from a pure maiden, fruit of truth, without plowshare and without seed, and an image of sowing, and the fruit shall grow after the planting forever from the word of my covenant, and signs shall come to pass. And Isaiah said, unto us a child is born, and then it continues the quote. And again, behold, the virgin shall conceive, and again, it continues the quote. Then it says, and the prophet Nathan said, I saw one, a maiden and without touch of man, and a man-child in her arms, and that was the Lord of the earth unto the end of the earth. And again, the prophet Baruch says, Christ the Eternal appears as a stone from the mountain and breaks in pieces the idol temples. David also said, arise, O Lord, unto thy resting place. And then the rest it quotes. So, with all that said, we have a clear quote attributed to Nathan, the prophet, of a messianic prophecy. He saw a maiden without touch of man and a man-child in her arms, and that was the Lord of the earth. So that seems to be a prophecy of the Messiah. And what did Peter say in the New Testament? He said, from the prophets, from Samuel on, they prophesied of the Messiah. So this is another example of where we see reason to believe that Nathan and other of the prophets did in fact prophesy to some small extent of the Messiah. And let's see, there's also in the Old Testament of Nathan, let's see, where else was it mentioned? One second. I believe it's mentioned in Chronicles. Yeah, so let me share the screen now. So right here we have the right here. Station 2 Chronicles 29. He stationed the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, with stringed instruments, with harps, according to the commandment of David, of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet. For thus was the commandment of the Lord by his prophets. So we don't really see this in the book of Gad the seer. So this account probably would have been in the book of Nathan the prophet, where the Levites were commanded to do this by command of David. Okay. So with that said, that's the basic gist of how we would reconstruct that. So I think we may end it here for now because no one's watching, and I've done it for about almost 4 hours, and we're still quite a ways away from finishing this. I plan to go through all of the rest of the Old Testament, as well as showing you guys the New Testament as well. So let me see. I think, these other books we mentioned, Ahijah, Iddo, Shemaiah, I mean, the best way that we can reconstruct those is that to use the books that we have, Kings and Chronicles, and use those as a starting point to fill in the stories of those. And Lives of the Prophets also gives small information about Ahijah and I think Shemaiah as well. Let me just see what it says. Let me just review it again. 1 second here. Okay, it does not have Shemaiah. And then it has Ahijah and Iddo, but not Shemaiah for some reason. Let's see, Ahijah, it gives a small little thing. It has a vision of 2 bullocks trampling on the people, charging upon the priests. He foretold to Solomon that his wives would bring disgrace on him and all his house. He rebuked Jeroboam because he dealt treacherously with the Lord. But yeah, it's not too much different than what we already know from Scripture. And then Iddo. It says for Iddo that he was the one who led him astray and was killed by the lion. So let me see here 1 second. And then I want to share with you guys. So remember I was saying the Chronicles of Israel, like, hold on. Let me share the screen. Right here where I said the Chronicles of David, Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah, 1st and 2nd Kings. And then we had 1st and 2nd Chronicles and the Apocryphal Chronicles. So this would be the Kings of Judah and the Kings of Israel. Well, the thing is, 1st and 2nd Chronicles has a bunch of things saying for the rest of the acts of this king, go to Samuel the seer, Gad the seer, and Nathan books. For more events about Solomon's life, go to Nathan the prophet and Ahijah the prophet and Iddo the seer. More information about the next one, Shemaiah and Iddo. Next one, this. So I believe there was a similar thing in the book of the Chronicles of Israel. So in the book of the Chronicles of Israel, we would have seen things like, for more information about this king, go to the book of Elijah the prophet, book of Elisha the prophet, the book of Micaiah, or Micah, as I believe. More information, go to the book of Obadiah. Go to the book of Jonah for this prophet, this king. More information, go to the book of Nahum. More information, go to the book of Hosea, book of Amos, Joel. So in all these cases, we would have in in the Apocryphal Chronicles book that we don't have, it would have had the same style of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, where it refers you to books of the prophets. And what's interesting is most of the minor prophets are prophets from Israel, kingdom of Israel, and not the kingdom of Judah. And isn't it interesting how we have just tiny little portions of most of these books when they come from the kingdom of Israel? That may be not coincidence. That may be the fact that we are missing prophecies from the Israelite prophets because they were considered less important than Judah by Judah. Judah thought that Israel was less important than them. So they didn't preserve their prophets' writings, the Israel's prophets' writings, as well as Judah did. So for example, we know from Kings that Elijah prophesied during the time of Ahab, right? And like a lot of these individuals, we know from Kings when they would have been living in. So we can use that to kind of reconstruct that as well. But yeah, so I'll stop here. We'll continue next time, whenever that is, with talking about the Psalms of David and the wisdom of Solomon and things of that nature, and more of the prophets and other books like Ahikar, Tobit. We have the post-exile writings, Ezra, Nehemiah, and all these, like Esther. We got Judith, Patariza. These are all ones that we'll be talking about. Maccabees books, and then we'll be also finishing with Dead Sea Scroll writings, specific to the Dead Sea Scroll community. So we will checking that out later. I don't know when I'll be going on for the next part. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Maybe I'll be on later today, but I definitely need a break right now. Today I have Mondays off for a few weeks, so a few more weeks. So that's why I've been doing this today, and I missed yesterday. I don't know if I'll do it later this week or not, or maybe later today, or just maybe I'll do it on Sunday. So I will finish the list of the Old Testament, and we will also go through the New Testament. I see one person on, so why don't I just share? I'll just show you the list of the books, just so you can kind of have a cool preview of what the books are going to be. So we finished to around book 61 in my list. So the next books we got here, Psalms, then there's just various apocryphal Psalms of David. I have some songs of David or Psalms of David that I believe also existed in special books like compilations. So the reason I call it Psalms of Israel is because it's not all by David. So anyway, so I believe there were songs about the patriarchs and songs about the angels that David wrote. Then Book of the Calendar. I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar texts are from David. I'll explain why next time. David wrote songs for the various sacrifices, like the daily sacrifices, Sabbath, festival sacrifices, and then songs for exorcising demons. Both David and Solomon would have written psalms for that. And then just the rest of the Psalms of Solomon. So Psalms of Solomon, Odes of Solomon, Songs of the Sage, I consider Solomon. Then we have the Song of Solomon that we know of. Book of Wisdom. I call this the foolishness of Solomon. So the wisdom of Solomon, I call the wisdom of Solomon. Book of Ecclesiastes, I call the foolishness of Solomon. Then we got some Proverbs of Solomon. Those are extra Proverbs, not in our copies. The Book of Proverbs, I call the wisdom of Hezekiah. Then we have the Chronicles of David. So that's Samuel, Kings, extra prophet books like Jehu, Elijah, Elisha. I have this here as original. This because I believe all the minor prophets, I believe, had a longer book that once existed. So Book of Micaiah, Obadiah, Jonah, Nahum, Hosea, Amos, Joel. We've got Ahikar here, Tobit. This Apocryphon of Isaiah, I believe, is included as Ascension of Isaiah, but was also longer and had other stuff in it. We have Isaiah, Visions of the Seers, Apocryphon of Jeremiah, which basically is a longer, better version of Fourth Baruch and also has fragments. It represents the text that we have fragments of in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as there's an Arabic Apocryphon of Jeremiah. So this would be the original version of that. Regular Book of Jeremiah and Lamentations. Then we have Book of Baruch, which is just for me, Second Baruch and First Baruch. The Visions of Baruch, so that's Third Baruch, and another book called Fifth Baruch. Apocryphon of Ezekiel, regular Ezekiel. And then again, there was a longer form of Habakkuk, I believe. Got Daniel, then there's the Syriac Apocalypse of Daniel. A longer form of Zephaniah, which included the Apocalypse of Zephaniah. Here we have Second Esdras. I call that Visions of Salathiel, not Book of Ezra, but Salathiel or Shealtiel. Then we have Visions of Ezra. That's just the portions of 5th and 6th Ezra that scholars call it. We have Haggai and Zechariah, the original books for those. Malachi, I believe, as well. Apocalypse of Zerubbabel. I already mentioned the Chronicles books. So Ezra, that's First Esdras, in my view. Nehemiah. Then we have Esther, Book of Esther and Mordecai. Book of Patariza and Begazro, found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Book of Judith, Epistle of Aristeas. Then we have the 3 Maccabees books. The Lost Book of the Chronicles of Jason. Lost Book of Chronicles of Hyrcanus, John Hyrcanus. Got Sirach. Then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls ones, so Copper Scroll, Damascus Document, Community Rule, War Scroll. The various Peshers. We have the Peshers that were found, and then we have Peshers I believe also existed, but we don't have any fragments of them. So I think there was Peshers on basically everything. So Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, the Law. So Halakhic letter, scholars call it. I regard that as scripture as well. The various Peshers, like the Pesher Psalms, there's a pesher of Song of Solomon, and then we have peshers of the prophets like Isaiah, Hosea, Nahum, Habakkuk. We have peshers of those. I believe chronicles were written of the Jews in like captivity in different places like Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. Book of Esther actually tells us there was a chronicles of the Jews for Persia and Media. And probably something for the Jews in Egypt and the Jews under Greece and Rome. And that Josephus probably quotes some of this, like summarizes some of these lost books of chronicles. And then I suspect that the Essenes probably had their own book of prophecies that we don't know about. That one's completely lost. We have no clue what that book would have been. But so anyway, that's the Old Testament. And we got the New Testament here. I'll just read through the list. Apocalypse of the Magi. Then we have the Apocryphon of James. And some of these books are questionable because they have some Gnostic, in the current form, they seem to have Gnostic stuff in it. So, but I include them in my list. Infancy Gospel of James, Infancy Gospel of Thomas, History of Joseph the Carpenter. I include the book of John the Baptist from the Mandean scriptures. And we have the Encomium on John the Baptist, Apocalypse of Lazarus, Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Andrew is completely lost, but I believe we can reconstruct it. Questions of John, that's considered a Gnostic book. Gospel of Judas, considered Gnostic. Gospel of Nicodemus. Then there's the Gospel of Gamaliel, also known as Homilies on the Lament of Mary and Martyrdom of Pilate. Got the first Apocalypse of James, then the Book of the Resurrection by Bartholomew. Questions of Bartholomew. Then the Apocryphon of John, which is considered Gnostic. We have the Mysteries of John. Then some encomiums. So encomium on the 4 bodiless creatures. Encomium on the Archangel Michael. Then we have Investiture of Michael, Investiture of Gabriel, Encomium of Abaddon. Then we have the Gospel and Revelation of the Apostles, Apocalypse of Thomas, the Psalms of Thomas, Book of Thomas the Contender. That's considered Gnostic by some people. I think that's not as compelling to be Gnostic. The earlier ones that I said are Gnostic are more questionable, like Judas. Apocryphon of John is very much Gnostic. In its current form anyway. Gospel of Thomas is falsely accused to be Gnostic. It was found in the Gnostic writings, but it's definitely not Gnostic. And then we have down here Gospel of Philip. There's like a couple things that sound slightly Gnostic, but overall it's not really Gnostic. We got Letter of Peter to Philip, the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, which by the name you can tell there's some things in it that seem to be Gnostic. Gospel of Peter, Gospel of the Hebrews, Gospel of John. Then there's the Encomium on Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Then there's the Pistis Sophia, often regarded as Gnostic. I would say there's a lot of stuff in it that makes me think it's not originally Gnostic in its original form. So there's the books of You or Jew, which is the name is Yahweh. Then there's the Ethiopian Ardit. Then there's the Book of the Covenant in the Ethiopian Bible. Then there's the Didache, the Homilies and Recognitions of Clement. There's the Apostolic Constitutions and the Synodos, also in the Ethiopian Bible. The Ethiopian Clement, which is books 3 through 7. The Apocalypse of Peter. Then there's the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, which is also part of the Ethiopian Bible. We've got the Teachings of Silvanus, Book of Revelation, the Shepherd of Hermas, Sirach Apocalypse, Apocalypse of Stephen. So when Stephen died, he had a vision. Okay, Apocalypse of Paul. Then there's the Gospel of Barnabas. That's considered a Muslim forgery, but I think perhaps in the original text it was authentic. I got the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Luke, and then you have the various Acts books. So I call them Chronicles instead of Acts. But so you have Book of Acts, Acts of Paul, Acts of Peter, Andrew, Thomas, John, Acts of Philip. Then you have the various other lesser Acts, Acts of Matthias / Matthew, the Acts of James, son of Zebedee, Acts of James, son of Alphaeus, then Simon the Zealot, and Jude. Then you got Second Apocalypse of James, Acts of Stephen, Acts of Barnabas, the Letter of the Apostles, part of the Ethiopian Bible. Then just the letters of Paul. I include in the letters of Paul 3 Corinthians, and you also have the letters of Paul and Seneca that I include. Then the regular letters of the New Testament: James, Jude, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Hebrews, Epistle of Barnabas. Then you have the 2 letters of Clement that I include. There's 2 other letters of Clement that probably are, scholars say they're not by Clement, but they claim to be by Clement in the headings, and they're written by Clement to the virgins. There's a letter of Titus to the virgins. That's called Apocryphal Titus, or Pseudo Titus, scholars call it. We have homilies of Evodius. There's 2 of them. I just put it as one book. Got the Syriac narrative of Mary. Then you have a letter of Luke, a letter of John to Prochorus, correspondence of Maria and Ignatius, letters of Ignatius to John, correspondence of Ignatius and Mary. And then you have all of Ignatius's letters, which I accept. Letter of Polycarp. Then you have Dionysius the Areopagite. I consider all his writings to be authentic. So scholars call him the pseudo Dionysius. I don't. So the various works of Dionysius I include as authentic scripture. You have the book of Hierotheus, then the Acts of Heracles, Acts of Axabius, the Doctrine of Addai, the Acts of Mari, the Acts of Charbel and Barsamia. Then there's the Martyrdom of Polycarp, Acts of Nereus and Achilles. Then there's various, I just put this in one grouping, various acts of the martyrs. So various martyrs throughout history have died. Perhaps some of those should be collected into a book form, a compilation of some sort. So I just put it right there. Any other people not covered is just the Chronicles of the Martyrs. Got the Sentences of Sextus, the Apology of Quadratus, the Apology of Aristides. Then we have the 5 books of Papias that are lost. We can probably reconstruct those pretty good, like a general outline. Then we have the Gospel of Truth, which I include. That's considered Gnostic by scholars. And then we have a book of Valentinus, I believe, is by him. It's called the Tripartite Tractate and is also considered Gnostic as well. So anyway, those are the writings that I'll be including in my version. Obviously, that's a lot to include in a single book, so it probably won't be all in one volume, separate volumes, but that's what I consider to be part of the scriptures. So again, we only got to about book 70 today, or book 60 or something. We'll continue next time, whenever that is. God bless you guys. Shalom.